Oh. Oh no. Bonsoir, bonsoir. Oh, merde. Oh, Ah non, tu vas pas bouger, toi, putain de truc à la con.
An uncontrolled bolt of information seared through Jared's consciousness as 15 life stories poured into him, and his own meager store of experiences branched into 15 pipelines. Salutations and introductions were unnecessary and superfluous. In an instant, Jared knew and felt everything he would need to know about these 15 strangers, who were now as intimately part of him as any human could be with another human. It was a mercy that each of these lives was unnaturally short. Jared collapsed. "That was interesting," Jared heard someone say. Almost instantaneously, he recognized the comment as coming from Brian Michelson, even though he had never communicated with him before. "I hope he's not planning to make a habit out of that," another voice said. Steve Seaborg. "Give him a break," said a third voice. "He was born without being integrated. There's a lot to handle all of a sudden. Come on, let's get him up off the floor." Sarah Pauling. Jared opened his eyes. Pauling was kneeling down next to him. Brahe and his other training mates formed a curious semicircle above him. "I'm fine," Jared said to all of them, keying his response to the squad-wide communication channel, which included Brahe. The choice to do this came naturally, part of the info dump of the integration. "I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know how to handle it, but I'm fine now." From his training mates radiated emotions like auras, each different. Concern, confusion, irritation, indifference, amusement. Jared followed the amused emotion back to its source. Pauling's amusement was visible not only as an emotional aura, but from the quirky smile on her face. "Oh, you don't seem all that much worse for wear," Pauling said. She stood up and then extended her hand. "Up you go," she said. Jared reached up, took her hand, and pulled himself up. "Sarah's got a pet," Seaborg said. And there was a ripple of amusement among some of the squad, and a strange emotional ping that Jared suddenly recognized as a form of laughter. "Shut up, Steve," Pauling said. "You hardly know what a pet is." "Doesn't make him less of one," Seaborg said. "Doesn't make you less of a jerk," Pauling said. "I'm not a pet," Jared said. And suddenly all eyes turned to him. He found it less intimidating than the first time, now that he had all of them in his head. He focused his attention on Seaborg. "Sarah was simply being kind to me. It doesn't make me a pet. It doesn't make her my master. It just means she was nice enough to help me off the floor." Seaborg audibly snorted and then removed himself from the semicircle, intently finding something else to be interested in. A few others broke off to join him. Sarah turned to Brahe. "Does this happen with every training squad?" she asked. Brahe smiled. "Did you think being inside each other's heads would make it easier for you to get along? There's no place to hide. What's really surprising is that one of you hasn't taken a punch at someone else yet. Usually by this time I have to pry a couple of trainees apart with a crowbar." Brahe turned to Jared. "You going to be all right?" "I think so," Jared said. "I need a little time to sort everything out. I have a lot in my head, and I'm trying to figure out where it all goes." Brahe looked back over to Pauling. "You think you can help him sort it out?" Pauling smiled. "Sure," she said. "You've got Dirac watch then," Brahe said. "We start training tomorrow. See if you can get him up to speed with everything before then." Brahe walked off. "I guess I really am your pet," Jared said. A wash of amusement flowed off Pauling toward Jared. "You're a funny man," she said. "You're the second person to tell me that today," Jared said. "Yeah?" Pauling said. "Know any good jokes?" Jared told Pauling the one about Sherlock Holmes. She laughed out loud. Chapter 5. Training for Special Forces soldiers takes 2 weeks. Gabriel Brahe began the training of Jared's squad, formerly the 8th Training Squad, by asking its members a question. "What makes you different than other human beings?" he asked. "Raise your hand." when you have the answer. The squad, arrayed in a ragged semicircle in front of Brahe, was silent. Finally, Jared raised his hand. "We're smarter, stronger, and faster than other humans," he said, remembering the words of Judy Curie. "Good guess," Brahe said, "but wrong. We are designed to be stronger, faster, and smarter than other humans, but we're that way as a consequence of what makes us different. What makes us different is that alone among humans we were born with a purpose, and that purpose is simple: to keep humans alive in this universe." The members of the squad looked around at each other. Sarah Pauling raised her hand. "Other people help to keep humans alive. We saw them on Phoenix Station on our way here." "But they weren't born for it," Brahe said. "Those people you saw, the real born, are born without a plan. They're born because biology tells humans to make more humans, but it doesn't consider what to do with them after that. Real born go for years without the slightest clue what they're going to do with themselves. From what I understand, some of them never actually figure it out. They just walk through life in a daze and then fall into their graves at the end of it. Sad and inefficient. You may do many things in your life, but walk through it in a daze will not be one of them," Brahe continued. "You are born to protect humanity, and you are designed for it. Everything in you, down to your genes, reflects that purpose. That's why you are stronger and faster and smarter than other humans." Brahe nodded toward Jared. "And why you were born as adults, ready to fight quickly, effectively, and efficiently. It takes the Colonial Defense Forces 3 months to train real-born soldiers. We do the same training and more in 2 weeks. Steve Seaborg raised his hand. "Why does it take the real-born so long to train?" he asked. "Let me show you," Brahe said. "Today is the first day of training. Do you know how to stand at attention or other basic drill maneuvers?" The members of the training squad looked at Brahe blankly. "Right," Brahe said. "Here come your instructions." Jared sensed his brain flooding with new information. The perception of this knowledge sat thickly upon his consciousness, unorganized. Jared sensed his brain pal funneling the information into the right places, the now familiar unpacking process launching branching paths of information that connected with things that Jared, now a full day old, already knew. Now Jared knew the military protocols of parade drilling. But more than that came an unexpected emotion that arose natively in his own brain and was amplified and augmented by the integrated thoughts of his training squad. Their informal array in front of Brahe, with some standing, some sitting, and some leaning back on the steps of their barracks, felt wrong, disrespectful, shameful. 30 seconds later, they were in 4 orderly rows of 4, standing at attention. Brahe smiled. "You got it on the first try," he said. "Parade rest." The squad shifted into parade rest position, feet apart, hand behind backs. "Excellent," Brahe said. "At ease." The squad visibly relaxed. "If I told you how long it takes to train real-born to do just that much, just as well as you did, you wouldn't believe me," Brahe said. "Real-born need to drill, to repeat, to practice again and again to get things right, to learn to do the things that you will learn and absorb in 1 or 2 sessions." "Why don't the real-born train this way?" asked Alan Milliken. "They can't," Brahe said. "They have old minds set in their ways. They have a hard enough time just learning to use a brain pal. If I tried sending them the drill protocols like I just sent to you, their brains simply couldn't handle it. And they can't integrate. They can't share information between themselves automatically like you do, and like all special forces do. They're not designed for it. They're not born to it." "We're superior, but there are real-born soldiers," Stephen Seaborg said. "Yes," Brahe said. "Special forces are less than 1% of the entire CDF fighting force." "If we're so good, why are there so few of us?" asked Seaborg. "Because the real-born are scared of us," Brahe said. "What?" asked Seaborg. "They doubt us," Brahe said. "They've bred us for the purpose of defending humanity, but they're not sure we're human enough. They've designed us to be superior soldiers, but they worry our design is flawed. So they see us as less than human and assign us the jobs they fear might make them less than human. They make just enough of us for those jobs, but no more than that. They don't trust us because they don't trust themselves. Well, that's stupid, Seaborg said. That's ironic, Sarah Pauling said. It's both, Brahe said. Rationality is not one of humanity's strong points. It's hard to understand why they think that way, Jared said. You're right, Brahe said, looking at Jared. And you've unintentionally hit on the racial flaw of the Special Forces. Real-born have a hard time trusting the Special Forces, but Special Forces have a hard time understanding the real-born. And it doesn't go away. I'm 11 years old. A sharp keen of amazement ricocheted through the squad. None of them could conceive of being that ancient. And I swear to you, I still don't get the real-born most of the time. The sense of humor, which you and I have discussed, Barack, is only the most obvious example of this. This is why, in addition to physical and mental conditioning, Special Forces training also includes specialized training into the history and culture of the real-born soldiers you will meet, so you can understand them and how they see us. Seems like a waste of time, Seaborg said. If the real-born don't trust us, why should we protect them? It's what we were born to do, Brahe said. I didn't ask to be born, Seaborg said. And you're thinking like a real-born, Brahe said. We are human too. When we fight for humans, we fight for ourselves. No one asks to be born, but we are born and we are human. We fight for ourselves as much as for any other human. If we don't defend humanity, we'll be just as dead as the rest of them. This universe is implacable. Seaborg lapsed into silence, but his irritation broadcast itself. Is this all we do? Jared asked. What do you mean? Brahe said. We are born for this purpose, Jared said. But can we do something else too? What do you suggest? Brahe asked. I don't know, Jared said. But I'm only a day old. I don't know much. This got pings of amusement and a smile from Brahe. We are born to this, but we're not slaves, Brahe said. We serve a term of service. 10 years. After that, we can choose to retire, become like the real-born and colonize. There's even a colony set aside for us. Some of us go there. Some of us choose to blend in with the real-born and the other colonies, but most of us stay with the Special Forces. I did. Why? Jared asked. It's what I was born for, Brahe repeated, and I'm good at it. You're all good at it, or will be soon enough. Let's get started. We do a lot of things faster than real-born, Sarah Pauling said, dipping into her soup. But I'm guessing that eating isn't one of them. If you ate too fast, you'd choke. That'd be funny, but it would also be bad. Jared sat across from her at one of the two mess tables assigned to the 8th Training Squad. Alan Milliken, curious about the differences between real-born and Special Forces training, discovered that real-born trained in platoons, not squads, and that Special Forces training squads were not the same size as squads in the CDF. Everything that Milliken learned on the subject was sent to the other members of the 8th and added to their store of information. Thus, another benefit of integration made itself known. Only one member of the 8th had to learn something in order for all the other members to know it. Jared slurped at his own soup. I think we eat faster than real-born, he said. Why is that? Pauling said. Jared took a big spoonful of soup. Because if they talk and eat soup at the same time, this happens, he said, drooling soup out of his mouth as he spoke. Pauline put her hand to her mouth to stifle a laugh. Uh-oh, she said, after a second. What? Jared said. Pauline glanced left, then right. Jared looked around and saw the entire mess hall looking at him. Jared belatedly realized that everyone could, in fact, hear him speak when he used his mouth. Nobody else in the mess hall had spoken with their mouth during the entire meal. Jared suddenly realized that the last time he had heard anyone else speak was when Lieutenant Cloud offered his farewells. Speaking out loud was weird. Sorry, he said on a general band. Everyone returned to their food. "You're making a fool of yourself," Stephen Seaborg, down the table, said to Jared. "It was just a joke," Jared said. "It was just a joke," Seaborg said, mockingly. "Idiot." "You're not very nice," Jared said. "You're not very nice," Seaborg said. "Jared may be an idiot, but at least he can think up his own words," Pauling said. "Hey, shut up, Pauling," Seaborg said. "No one asked you to butt in." Jared began to respond when an image popped up in his visual field. Squat, misshapen humans were arguing about something in high-pitched voices. One of them began to mock the other by repeating his words, like Seaborg had been doing to Jared. "Who are these people?" Seaborg asked. Pauling, too, looked mystified. Gabriel Brahe's voice popped into their heads. "They're children," he said. "Immature humans. And they're having an argument. I'll have you note they are arguing just like you were." "He started it," Seaborg said, looking for Brahe in the mess hall. He was at a far table, eating with other officers. He didn't turn to look at the trio. "One of the reasons the real board don't trust us is because they're convinced we're children," Brahe said. "Emotionally stunted children in adult-sized bodies. And the thing about that is, they're right. We have to learn to control ourselves like adults do, just like all humans do. And we have far less time to learn how to do it." "But," Seaborg began. "Quiet," Brahe said. "Seaborg, after our afternoon drill, you have an assignment. From your brain power, you can access Phoenix's data net. You get to research etiquette and interpersonal conflict resolution. Find out as much as you can and share it with the rest of the 8 by the end of the evening. Do you understand me?" "Yes," Seaborg said. He glanced over at Jared accusingly and then lapsed silently into his food. "Dirac, you get an assignment too. Read Frankenstein. See where it takes you." "Yes, sir," Jared said. "And don't drool anymore, soup," Brahe said. "You look like an ass." Brahe dropped his connection. Jared looked over to Pauline. "How come you didn't get in trouble?" he asked her. Pauline dipped the spoon into her soup. "My food stays where it's supposed to," she said, and swallowed. "And I don't act like a child." And then she stuck out her tongue. The afternoon drill introduced the 8th to their weapon, the MP-35A MP assault rifle. The rifle was bonded to its owner by use of BrainPal authentication. From that point forward, only its owner or another human with a BrainPal could fire the rifle. This cut down on the chance of a CDF soldier having his own weapon used against him. The MP-35A was additionally modified for Special Forces soldiers to take advantage of their integration abilities. Among other things, the MP-35A could be fired remotely. Special Forces had used this ability to fatally surprise any number of curious aliens over the years. The MP-35A was more than a simple rifle. It could, at the discretion of the soldier using it, fire rifled bullets, shot, grenades, or small guided missiles. It also featured flamethrower and particle beam settings. Any of this panoply of ammunition was constructed on the fly by the MP-35A out of a heavy metallic block of nanobots. Jared wondered idly how the rifle managed the trick. His BrainPal obligingly unpacked the physics behind the weapon, leading to a massive and terribly inconvenient unpacking of general physical principles, while the 8th was on the shooting range. Naturally, all of this unpacked information was forwarded onto the rest of the squad, all of whom looked over at Jared with varying levels of irritation. "Sorry," Jared said. By the end of the long afternoon, Jared had mastered the MP-35A and its myriad of options. Jared and another recruit named Joshua Letterman focused on the options the MP allowed for its rifled bullets, experimenting with different designs of the bullets, and assessing the advantages and disadvantages of each, duly noting each to the other members of the squad. When they were ready to move on to the other ammunition options available to them, Jared and Letterman took ample advantage of the information about those weapons fed in by other members of the 8th to master those options as well. Jared had to admit that whatever personal problems he might have with Steven Seaborg, if he ever needed someone to wield a flamethrower for him, Seaborg was going to be his first choice. Jared told him so as they hiked back to the barracks. Seaborg ignored him and pointedly started a private conversation with Andrea Gelman. After dinner, Jared staked out a spot on the steps of the barracks. After a brief tutorial from his brain pal, and taking care to cache his explorations so as not to repeat his embarrassing data spill from earlier in the day, he signed on Phoenix's public datanet and secured a copy of Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley's Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus, revised 3rd edition, 1831. 8 minutes later, he finished it, and was in something of a state of shock, intuiting correctly why Roddy hadn't read it. He and all the members of the 8, all of the Special Forces soldiers, were the spiritual descendants of the pathetic creature Victor Frankenstein had assembled from the bodies of the dead, and then jolted into life. Jared saw how Frankenstein felt pride in creating life, but how he feared and rejected the creature once that life had been given, how the creature lashed out, killing the doctor's family and friends, and how creator and created were finally consumed in a pyre, their fates interlocked. The allusions between the monster and the Special Forces were all too obvious. And yet, as Jared considered whether it was the fate of the Special Forces to be as misunderstood and reviled by the real-born as the monster was by his creator, he thought back on his brief encounter with Lieutenant Cloud. Cloud certainly didn't seem terrified or repulsed by Jared. He had offered his hand to him, a gesture that Victor Frankenstein pointedly refused from the monster he created. Jared also considered the fact that while Victor Frankenstein was the creator of the monster, his creator, Mary Shelley, implicitly offered pity and empathy to the monster. The real human in this story was a rather more complex person than the fictional one, and more inclined toward the creature than its fictional creator. He thought about that for a good solid minute. Jared greedily sought out links to the text, quickly alighting on the famous 1931 motion picture version of the story and devouring it at 10 times speed, only to find himself greatly disappointed. The eloquence of Shelley's monster was replaced by a sad, shambling grunter. Jared quickly sampled other filmed versions, but was continually disappointed. The monster he identified with was almost nowhere to be seen in any of these, even in the versions that paid lip service to the original text. Frankenstein's monster was a joke. Jared gave up on filmed versions before he reached the end of the 21st century. Jared tried another tack and sought out stories of other created beings, and was soon acquainted with Friday, R. Daniel Oliva, Data, Hal, Der Machinen Mensch, Astro Boy, the various Terminators, Chana Fortuna, Joe the Robot Bastard, and all manner of other droids, robots, computers, replicants, clones, and genetically engineered whatsits that were as much the spiritual descendants of Frankenstein's monster as he was. Curious, Jared moved backward in time from Shelley to find Pygmalion, golems, homunculi, and clockwork automatons. He read and watched the sad and often dangerous humorlessness of many of these creatures, and how it was used to make them objects of pity and comic relief. He now understood why Bragi was touchy about the whole sense of humor issue. Implicit in that touchiness was the idea that Special Forces were misrepresented in their depictions by the real-born, or so Jared thought, until he went searching for literature or recorded entertainments featuring the Special Forces as main characters. There were none. The colonial era was rife with entertainments about the colonial defense forces and its military battles and events. The battle for Armstrong seemed a particularly revisited topic, but in none of them were the Special Forces even hinted at. The closest thing was a series of pulpy novels published on Rama Colony featuring the adventures of a secret force of erotic superhuman soldiers who mostly overcame fictional alien species by having energetic sex with them until they surrendered. Jared, who at this time understood sex, largely in the reproductive sense, wondered why anyone would think this was a viable way to conquer one's enemies. He decided that he was probably missing something important about this sex thing, and filed it away to ask Bragi about later. In the meantime, there was the mystery of why, from the point of view of the fiction output of the colonies, the special forces didn't exist. But that was for another night, perhaps. Jared was eager to share his current explorations with his squad mates. He uncached his findings and released them to the others. As he did, he became aware that he wasn't the only one sharing discoveries. Bragi had assigned homework to the majority of the eight, and these explorations came flooding into his perception. Among them, etiquette and the psychology of conflict resolution from Seaboard, whom Jared could sense rolling his eyes at almost all of the material he was passing along, major battles of the colonial defense forces from Brian Michelson, animated cartoons from a recruit named Jerry Yukawa, human physiology from Sarah Pauling. Jared made a note to make fun of her later for giving him grief about his own assignment earlier in the day. His brain pal merrily began to unpack everything Jared's mates had learned. Jared leaned back into the stairs and watched the sunset as the information branched and expanded. Phoenix's sun had well and truly set by the time Jared had unpacked all his new learning. He sat inside a small pool of light illuminating the barracks and watched Phoenix's analog to insects zip around the light. One of the more ambitious of these small creatures landed on Jared's arm and plunged the needle-like proboscis into his flesh to suck out his fluids. A few seconds later, it was dead. The nanobots in Jared's smart blood, alerted to their situation by his brain pal, self-immolated inside the tiny animal, using the oxygen they carried as a combustible agent. The poor creature crisped from the inside. Minuscule and almost invisible wisps of smoke vented out of its spicules. Jared wondered who it was who programmed that sort of defensive response into his brain pal and smart blood. It seemed hateful of life in its intent. Maybe the real-born are right to fear us, Jared thought. From inside the barracks, Jared could perceive his squad mates arguing about what they had learned that night. Seaboard just declared Frankenstein's monster a bore. Jared launched himself inside to defend the monster's honor. During the morning and afternoons of the first week, the eight learned to fight, to defend, and to kill. In the evenings, they learned everything else, including some things Jared suspected were of questionable value. In the early evening of the second day, Andrea Gelman introduced the eight to the concept of profanity, which she picked up at lunch and shared just before dinner. At dinner, members of the eight enthusiastically told each other to pass the fucking salt, you fucking sack of shit, until Bragi told them to quit that goddamn shit, cocksuckers, because it got old pretty goddamn quick. There was general agreement that Bragi was correct, until Gelman taught the squad to swear in Arabic. On the third day, members of the eight asked for and received permission to enter the mess hall kitchens and use the ovens and certain ingredients. The next morning, the other training squads at Camp Carson were presented with enough sugar cookies for every recruit and their superior officers. On the fourth day, the members of the eight tried to tell each other jokes they had found on the Phoenix datanet, and mostly failed to make them work. By the time their brain pals unpacked the context of the joke, it was no longer funny. Only Sarah Pauling seemed to be laughing most of the time, and it was eventually determined she was laughing because she thought it was funny that none of the rest of them could tell a joke. No one else thought that was funny, to which Pauling laughed hard enough to fall off her cot. They all agreed that was funny. Also, puns were all right. On the fifth day, during which the afternoon was spent in an informational session about the disposition of the human colonies and their relationship with other intelligent species, which was to say, bad all the time, the eight critically evaluated pre-colonial era speculative fiction and entertainments about interstellar wars with aliens. The verdicts were reasonably consistent. The War of the Worlds met with approval until the ending, which struck the Eighth as a cheap trick. Starship Troopers had some good action scenes, but required too much unpacking of philosophical ideas. They liked the movie better, even though they recognized it was dumber. The Forever War made most of the Eighth unaccountably sad. The idea that a war could go on that long was almost unfathomable to a group of people who were a week old. After watching Star Wars, everyone wanted a lightsaber and was irritated that the technology for them didn't really exist. Everyone also agreed the Ewoks should all die. Two classics stuck with them. Ender's Game delighted them all. Here were soldiers who were just like them, except smaller. The main character was even bred to fight alien species like they were. The next day, the members of the Eighth greeted each other with the salutation, Ho Ender.
Oh merde, putain de saloperie.
The other was Charlie's Homecoming, one of the last books before the colonial era began, and one of the last books, therefore, to be able to imagine a universe other than what it was, one where the alien species humanity would meet greeted them with a welcome instead of a weapon. The book was eventually adapted into a film. By that time, it was clear it wasn't science fiction, but fantasy, and a bitter one at that. It was a flop. The members of the Eighth were transfixed by both the book and film, captivated by a universe they could never have, and one which would never have had them because they wouldn't be needed. On the sixth day, Jared and the rest of the Eighth finally figured out what that sex thing was all about. On the seventh day, and as a direct consequence of the sixth day, they rested. They're not of questionable value, Colin said to Jared about the things they had learned as they lay together in their cot later on the seventh day, intimate but not sexual. Maybe all of these things don't have any use in themselves, but they bring all of us closer together. We are closer together, Jared agreed. Not just like this. Colin pressed herself into Jared briefly and then released. Closer as people, as a group. All of those things you mentioned are silly, but they're training us how to be human. It was Jared's turn to press himself into Pauline, snuggling into her chest. I like being human, he said. I like you being human too, Pauline said, and then audibly giggled. For fuck's sake, you two, Seawolf said. Trying to sleep over here. Grump, Pauline said. She looked down at Jared to see if he would add anything, but he had fallen asleep. She kissed him lightly on the top of his head, and then joined him. In your first week, you physically trained to do all the things real-born soldiers can do, Brocky said. Now it's time to train you to do things only you can do. The Eighth stood at the beginning of a long obstacle course. You've already run this course, said Luke Goldstrom. Good of you to notice, Goldstrom, Brocky said. For your observational skills, you get to be the first one to run it today. Stay here. The rest of you spread out over the length of the course, please, as equally as possible. Presently, members of the Eighth were strung along the course. Brocky turned to Goldstrom. You see the course? He asked. Yes, Goldstrom said. You think you could run it with your eyes closed? No, Goldstrom said. I don't remember where everything is. I'd trip over something and kill myself. Do you all agree? Brocky asked. There were pings of affirmation. And yet, all of you will run this course with your eyes closed before we leave here today, because you have an ability that will allow you to do this. Your integration with your squad members. From around the squad came varying levels of skepticism. We use our integration to talk and to share data, said Brian Michelson. This is something entirely different. No, not different at all, Brahe said. The nighttime assignments of the last week were not just punishments and frivolity. You already knew that through your brain pal and your pre-birth conditioning you could learn quickly by yourself. In the last week, without realizing it, You've learned to share and absorb immense amounts of information between yourselves. There is no difference between that information and this. Pay attention. Jared gasped audibly, as did other members of the Eighth. In his head was not only the presence of Gabriel Brahe, but an intimate sensation of his physical presence and personal situation, overlaid on Jared's own consciousness. "Look through my eyes," Brahe said. Jared focused on the command, then had a sickening sense of vertigo as his perspective wheeled from his own vantage point to Brahe's. Brahe panned left and right, and Jared saw himself looking toward Brahe. Brahe snapped off the view. "It gets easier the more you do it," Brahe said. "And from now on, in every combat practice, you will do it. Your integration gives you situational awareness that is unique in this universe. All intelligent species share information in combat, however they can. Even real-born soldiers keep a communication channel open through their brain pals during battle. But only special forces have this level of sharing, this level of tactical awareness. It's at the heart of how we work and how we fight. As I said, last week you covered the basics of fighting like the real one. You learned how to go into combat as an individual. Now it's time to learn to fight like special forces, to integrate your combat skills with your squad. You will learn to share, and you will learn to trust what is shared with you. It will save your life, and it will save the life of your squad mates. This will be the hardest and most important thing you learn. So pay attention." Brahe turned back to Gulstrand. "Now, close your eyes." Gulstrand hesitated. "I don't know if I can keep my eyes closed," he said. "You're going to have to trust your squad," Brahe said. "I trust the squad," Gulstrand said. "I just don't trust myself." This got a sympathetic round of pings. "That's part of the exercise as well," Brahe said. "Off you go." Gulstrand closed his eyes and took a step. From his vantage point, halfway down the course, Jared could see Jerry Yukawa, in the first position, lean in slightly, as if physically attempting to close the distance between his mind and Gulstrand's. Gulstrand's passage through the obstacle course was slow, but became progressively steadier. Just before reaching Jared, and just after balancing on a wood beam suspended over mud, Gulstrand began to smile. He had become a believer. Jared felt Gulstrand reach for his point of view. Jared gave him full access to his senses, and passed along a feeling of encouragement and assurance. He sensed Gulstrand receiving it and briefly passing along his thanks. Then Gulstrand focused on scaling the rope wall Jared stood to the side of. At the top, he felt Gulstrand move on to the next squad member in the line, fully confident. By the end of the course, Gulstrand was moving nearly at full speed. "Excellent," Brahe said. "Gulstrand, take over that last position. Everybody else move down one position. Yukawa, you're up." 2 run-throughs later, not only were members of the squad sharing their perspective with the squad mate running the course, the squad mate on the course was sharing his shared perspective with them, giving everyone who hadn't run through the course a preview of what was coming up next. The next run-through after that had the squad mates on the side sharing vantage points with the person one station up from them, so they could better help the person on the course when they shifted into the position. By the time Jared was himself on the course, the entire squad had fully integrated their perspectives, and were getting the hang of quickly sampling another perspective and picking up relevant information without breaking from their own point of view. It was like being in 2 places at once. When Jared was on the course himself, he exulted in the strange intelligence of it all, at least until the beams over the mud, when his borrowed visual vantage point suddenly wheeled away from where his feet were. Jared missed his footing and fell flat into the mud. "Sorry about that," said Stephen Seaborg a few seconds later as Jared pulled himself out, eyes open. "I got bit by something. Distracted me." "Bullshit," Alan Milliken said to Jared privately. "I was one station down and looking right at him. He didn't get bit." Brahe cut in. "Seaborg, when you're in combat, letting a squad mate get killed because of a bug bite is the sort of thing that gets you on the unfortunate side of an airlock," he said. keep it in mind. Direct, keep moving. Jared closed his eyes and put one foot in front of the other. What does Seaborg have against me anyway? Jared asked Pauline. The two of them were practicing fighting with their combat knives. The squad members practiced for 5 minutes with each other member of the squad, with their integration sense on full. Fighting someone who was intimately aware of your internal state of mind made it an interesting extra challenge. You really don't know, Pauline said, circling with her knife held casually in her left hand. It's 2 things. 1, he's just a jerk. 2, he likes me. Jared stopped circling. What? He said. Pauline attacked viciously, feinting right and then slashing upward toward Jared's neck with her left hand. Jared stumbled backward and right to avoid the slashing. Pauline's knife switched hands and stabbed downward, missing Jared's leg by about a centimeter. Jared righted himself and settled into a defensive position. You distracted me, he said, circling again. You distracted yourself, Pauline said. I just took advantage of it when it happened. You won't be happy until you cut open an artery, Jared said. I won't be happy until you shut up and focus on trying to kill me with that knife, Pauline said. You know, Jared began, and suddenly leaned back. He felt Pauline's intent to slash a fraction of a second before she made her lunge. Before she could pull back, Jared leaned back inside the reach of her extended arm, and brought up the blade in his right hand to touch it lightly to her ribcage. Before it got there, Pauline brought her head up and jammed it into the bottom of Jared's jaw. There was an audible clack as Jared's teeth slammed together. Jared's field of vision widened out. Pauline took advantage of Jared's stunned pause to step back and sweep his legs out from under him, spilling him flat on his back. When Jared came to, Pauline had pinned his arms with her legs and held her knife directly on top of a carotid artery. You know, Pauline said, mocking Jared's last words. If this were real combat, I'd have sliced 4 of your arteries by now and moved on to whoever...
Oh, merde!
Pauline sheathed her knife and took her knees off his arms. Good thing we're not in real combat, Jared said, and propped himself up. About Seaborg, Pauline punched Jared square in the nose. His head snapped back. Pauline's knife was back at his throat and her legs pinning his arms a fraction of a second later. What the hell? Jared said. Our 5 minutes aren't up, Pauline said. We're still supposed to be fighting. But you, Jared began. Pauline jabbed him in the neck and drew smart blood. Jared exclaimed aloud. There's no but you, Pauline said. Jared, I like you, but I've noticed that you don't focus. We're friends, and I know you think that means that we can have a nice conversation while we're doing this, but I swear to you that the next time you give me an opening like you did just now, I'm going to cut your throat. Your smart blood will probably keep you from dying, and it'll keep you from thinking that just because we're friends doesn't mean I won't seriously hurt you. I like you too much, and I don't want you to die in real combat because you're thinking about something else. The things we'll be fighting in real combat aren't going to pause for conversation. Watch out for me in combat, Jared said. You know I would, Pauline said. But this integration thing only goes so far, Jared. You have to watch out for yourself. Brahe told him their 5 minutes were up. Pauline let Jared off the floor. I'm serious, Jared, Pauline said, after she hauled him up. Pay attention next time, or I'll cut you bad. Now, Jared said, and touched his nose. Or punch me. True, Pauline said, and smiled. I'm not picky. So all that about Seaborg liking you was just to distract me? Jared said. Oh no, Pauline said. It's completely true. Oh, Jared said. Pauline laughed aloud. There you go. Getting distracted again, she said. Sarah Pauline was one of the first to get shot. She and Andrea Gelman were ambushed as they were scouting a small valley. Pauline went down immediately, shot in the head and the neck. Gelman managed to identify the locations of the shooters before a trio of shots in the chest and abdomen brought her down. In both cases, their integration with the rest of the squad collapsed. It felt as if they were ripped out bodily from the squad's pooled consciousness. Others fell in short order, gutting the squad and sending its remaining members into disarray. It was a bad war game for the Earth. Jerry Yukawa compounded the problem by getting shot in the leg. The training suit he was wearing registered the hit and froze the mobility to the limb. Yukawa fell mid-stride and barely kicked his way behind the boulder Catherine Berkeley had gotten behind a few seconds before. "You were supposed to lay down suppressing fire," Yukawa said accusingly. "I did," Berkeley said. "I am. There is one of me and 5 of them. You do better." The 5 members of the 13th Training Squad who had trapped Yukawa and Berkeley behind the boulder sent another volley their way. The members of the 13th felt the simulated mechanical kick of their training rifles, while their brain pals visually and orally simulated the bullets tearing down the tiny cul-de-sac of a valley. Yukawa and Berkeley's brain pals correspondingly simulated some of these bullets smacking the bulk of the boulder and others whining as they shot past. The bullets weren't real, but they were as real as fate could get. "We could use a little help here," Yukawa said to Stephen Seaborg, who was the commander for the exercise. "We hear you," Seaborg said, and then turned to look at Jared, his only other surviving soldier, who was standing mutely looking at him. 4 members of the 8th were still standing, only figuratively speaking in the case of Yukawa, while 7 members of the 13th were roaming the forest. The odds weren't good. "Stop looking at me like that," Seaborg said. "This isn't my fault." "I didn't say anything," Jared said. "You were thinking it," Seaborg said. "I wasn't thinking it either," Jared said. "I was reviewing data." "Of what?" Seaborg asked. "Of how the 13th moves and thinks," Jared said. "From the other members of the 8th before they died. I'm trying to see if there's something we can use." "Can you do it a little quicker?" Yukawa said. "Things are looking mighty bleak on this end." Jared looked over to Seaborg. Seaborg sighed. "Fine," he said. "I'm open to suggestion. What have you got?" "You're going to think I'm crazy," Jared said. "But there's something I've noticed. So far, neither us nor them look up very much." Seaborg looked up into the forest canopy, looking at the sunlight peek through the canopy of native Terran trees and their phoenix equivalent, thick bamboo-like stalks that threw off impressive branches. The 2 types of flora did not compete genetically. They were naturally incompatible because they developed on different worlds, but they competed for sunlight, reaching as far into the sky as possible and branching thickly to offer scaffolding for leaves and leaf equivalents to do their photosynthetic work. "We don't look up because there's nothing up there but trees," Seaborg said. Jared started counting off seconds in his head. He got as far as 7 before Seaborg said, "Oh." "Oh," Jared agreed. He popped up a map. "We're here. Yukawa and Berkeley are here. There's forest all the way between here and there. You think we can get from here to there in the trees?" Seaborg said. "That's not the question," Jared said. "The question is whether we can do it fast enough to keep Yukawa and Berkeley alive, and quietly enough not to get ourselves killed." Jared quickly discovered that walking through the trees was an idea better in theory than in execution. He and Seaborg almost fell twice within the first 2 minutes. Moving from branch to branch required rather more coordination than either expected. The phoenix tree's branches were not nearly as load-bearing as they assumed, and the Terran trees featured a surprising number of dead branches. Their progress was slower and louder than they would have liked. A rustling came from the east. In separate trees, Jared and Seaborg hugged trunks and froze. 2 members of the 13th walked out of the brush 30 meters away and 6 meters below Jared's position. The 2 were alert and wary, looking and listening for their quarry. They didn't look up. Out of the corner of his eye, Jared saw Seaborg slowly reach toward his MP. "Wait," Jared said. "We're still in their peripheral vision. Wait until we're behind them." The 2 soldiers edged forward, putting Jared and Seaborg behind them. Seaborg nodded to Jared. They silently unslung their MPs, stabilized as best they could, and sighted in on the backs of the soldiers. Seaborg gave the order. Bullets flew in a short burst. The soldiers stiffened and fell. "The rest have Yukawa and Berkeley pinned down," Seaborg said. "Let's get cracking." He set off. Jared was amused at how Seaborg's take-charge spirit, so recently dampened, had suddenly returned. 10 minutes later, Yukawa and Berkeley were down to the last of their ammunition, and Jared and Seaborg caught sight of the remaining members of the 13th. To the left of them, 8 meters below, 2 soldiers were camped behind a large fallen tree. To the right, and about 30 meters forward, another pair were behind a collection of boulders. These soldiers were keeping Yukawa and Berkeley busy, while the 5th soldier quietly flanked their position. All of them had their backs to Jared and Seaborg. "I'll take the ones by the log, you take the ones at the boulders," Seaborg said. "I'll tell Berkeley about the flanker, but tell him not to get him until we get our guys. No point giving ourselves away." Jared nodded. Now that Seaborg was feeling confident, his planning was getting better. Jared filed that down away to consider later and moved to steady himself in their tree, putting his back against the trunk and hooking his left foot under a lower branch for additional support. Seaborg moved one branch lower on the tree to get around a branch that was impeding his sight line. The branch he stepped on, dead, cracked loudly under his weight and collapsed, falling out of the tree in what seemed the loudest possible way. Seaborg lost his footing and grabbed wildly at the branch below where he had stepped, dropping his MP. 4 soldiers on the ground turned, looked up, and saw him dangling there helplessly. They raised their weapons. "Shit," Seaborg said, and looked up at Jared. Jared fired in automatic burst mode at the 2 soldiers at the boulders. One seized up and fell. The other dove around the boulders. Jared swiveled and fired on the soldiers at the log. He didn't hit anything, but unnerved them long enough to switch his MP to guided missile mode and fire at the space between the 2 soldiers. The simulated rocket peppered both with virtual bits of shrapnel. They fell. Jared turned just in time to see the remaining soldier at the boulder lining up her shot. He launched a guided missile at her as she pulled her trigger. Jared felt his ribs go stiff and painful as his training suit constricted, and fumbled his MP. He'd been shot. But the fact he didn't drop out of the tree told him he was still alive. Training exercise. Jared was so pumped full of adrenaline that he thought he might pee himself. "Hello, help here," Seaborg said, and reached over with his left hand for Jared to pull him up, just as the 5th soldier, who had circled back, shot him in the right shoulder. Seaborg's entire arm stiffened in its suit. He let go of the branch he was dangling from. Jared grabbed at his left hand and caught him before his fall had gained momentum. Jared's left leg, still hooked under its branch by the foot, strained painfully from the additional load put on it. On the ground, the soldier lined up his shot. Virtual bullets or not, Jared knew if he were shot, the stiffening of his suit would make him drop Seaborg and probably fall himself. Jared reached over with his right hand, grabbed his combat knife, and threw hard. The knife buried itself in the meat of the soldier's left thigh. The soldier collapsed, screaming and pawing gingerly at the knife, until Berkeley came up behind him and shot him into immobility. "The 8 wins the war game," Jared heard Brahe say. "I'm relaxing the training suits now for everyone who is still frozen. Next war game matchups in 30 minutes. The pressure on Jared's right side was suddenly and considerably relieved, as was the stiffness of Seaborg's suit. Jared pulled him up, and then they both carefully picked their way to the forest floor to retrieve their weapons. The unfrozen members of the 13th were waiting for them, breaking off from their squad mate, who was still moaning on the ground. "You fuck," one of them said, getting directly into Jared's face. "You threw a knife into Charlie. You're not supposed to try to kill anyone. That's why it's called a war game." Seaborg jammed in between Jared and the soldier. "Tell that to your friend, asshole," he said. "If your friend had shot us, I would have dropped 8 meters without any way to control my fall." He didn't seem particularly worried about me dying as he was lining up his shot. Jared knifing your friend saved my life, and your friend will survive. So fuck him and fuck you. Seaborg and the soldiers sized each other up for another few seconds before the other soldier turned his head, spat on the ground, and walked back to his squad mate. Thanks, Jared said to Seaborg. Seaborg glanced over to Jared, and then to Yukawa and Berkeley. Let's get out of here, he said. We've got another war game. He stomped off. The three of them followed. On the way back, Seaborg dropped back to pace Jared. It was a good idea to use the trees, he said. I'm glad you caught me before I dropped. Thank you. You're welcome, Jared said. I still don't like you much, Seaborg said. But I'm not going to have a problem with you anymore. I'll take that, Jared said. It's a start anyway. Seaborg nodded and picked up his pace again. He was silent the rest of the way in. Well, look who we have here, Lieutenant Cloud said, as Jared entered the shuttle with the other former members of the Aid. They were on their way back to Phoenix Station for their first assignments. It's my pal Jared. Hello, Lieutenant Cloud, Jared said. It's good to see you again. Hey, it's Dave, Cloud said. Done with your training, I see. Damn, I wish my training had just been 2 weeks. We still cover a lot, Jared said. I don't doubt that in the least, Cloud said. So, what's your assignment, Private Dirac? Where will you be headed? I've been assigned to the Kite, Jared said. Me and two of my friends, Sarah Pauling and Stephen Seaborg. Jared pointed at Pauling, who had already sat down. Seaborg had yet to get on the shuttle. I've seen the Kite, Cloud said. Newer ship. Nice lines. Never been on it, of course. You special forces types keep to yourselves. That's what they tell me, Jared said. Andrea Gelman came on board, bumping Jared slightly. She pinged an apology to him. Jared looked over and smiled. Well, looks like it's going to be a full-up flight, Cloud said. You can sit up in the co-pilot seat again if you like. Thanks, Jared said, and glanced over to Pauling. I think I'll sit with my other friends this time. Cloud looked over at Pauling. Oh, that's entirely understandable, Cloud said. Although remember, you owe me some new jokes. I hope in all that training you did, they gave you some time to work on your sense of humor. Jared paused for a minute, recalling his first conversation with Gabriel Brahe. Lieutenant Cloud, did you ever read Frankenstein? He asked. Never did, Cloud said. I know the story. Saw the most recent movie version not too long ago. The monster talk, which I'm told means it's closer to the actual book than not. What did you think of it? Jared said. It was all right, Cloud said. The acting was a little over the top. I felt sorry for the monster. The Dr. Frankenstein character was something of an asshole. Why do you ask? I'm just curious, Jared said, and nodded toward the seating compartment, which was now almost completely full. We all read it. Gave us a lot to think about. Ah, said Cloud. I see. Jared, allow me to share with you my philosophy of human beings. It can be summed up in 4 words. I like good people. You seem like good people. I can't say that's all that matters to everyone, but it's what matters to me. That's good to know, Jared said. I think my philosophy runs the same way. Well, then we're going to get along just fine, Cloud said. Now, any new jokes? I might have a few, Jared said. Chapter 6. We'll talk out loud here, if you don't mind, General Zillard said to Jane Sagan. It makes the waitstaff nervous to see 2 people staring intently at each other without actually making any sounds. If they don't see we're talking, they'll come over every other minute to see if there's anything we need. It's distracting. As you wish, Sagan said. The 2 of them sat in the general's mess, with Phoenix spinning above them. Sagan stared. Zillard followed her gaze. It's amazing, isn't it? He said. It is, Sagan said. You can see the planet out of any portal on the station, at least some of the time. But no one ever looks, Zillard said. And then you come here and you just can't stop staring at it. I can't in any event. He pointed to the crystal dome that encased them. "This dome was a gift. You know that?" Sagan shook her head. "The Ayla gave it to us as we built this station. It's diamond. This whole thing. They said it was a natural diamond that they carved out of an even larger crystal they hauled up from the core of one of their system's gas giants. The Ayla were amazing engineers, so I've read. The story might even be true." "I'm not familiar with the Ayla," Sagan said. "They're extinct," Zillard said. 150 years ago, they got into a war with Yoban over a colony. They had an army of clones and the means to make those clones quickly. And for a while, it looked like they were going to beat the Yoban. Then the Yoban tailored a virus keyed to the clones' genetics. The virus was initially harmless and transmitted by air, like a flu. Our scientists estimated it spread through the entire Ayla army in about a month. And then a month after that, the virus matured and began to attack the cellular reproduction cycle of every single Ayla military clone. The victims literally dissolved. "All at once?" Sagan asked. "It took about a month," Zillard said, "which is why our scientists estimated it took that long to infect the entire army in the first place. With the Ayla army out of the way, the Oban wiped out the civilian population in short order. It was a fast and brutal genocide. The Oban are not a compassionate species. Now all the Ayla planets are owned by the Oban, and the Colonial Union learned two things. One, clone armies are a very bad idea. Two, stay out of the way of the Oban, which we have done until now." Sagan nodded. The Special Forces battlecruiser Kite and her crew had recently begun recon and stealth raids in Oban territory to gauge the Oban's strength and response capabilities. It was dangerous work since the Oban were unforgiving of assaults, and technically speaking, the Oban and the Colonial Union were not in a state of hostilities. Knowledge of the Oban-Array-Enishan alliance was a closely guarded secret. The majority of the Colonial Union and the CDF were unaware of the alliance and its threat to humans. The Enishans even maintained a diplomatic presence on Phoenix, in the colonial capital of Phoenix City. Strictly speaking, they were allies. "Do you want to talk about the Oban raids?" Sagan said. In addition to being a squad leader on the Kite, she was the ship's intelligence officer, charged with force assessment. Most Special Forces officers held more than one post and also led combat squads. It kept the ship rosters lean, and keeping officers in combat positions appealed to the Special Forces' sense of mission. When you were born to protect humanity, no one is above combat. "Not now," Zillard said. "This isn't the place for it. I wanted to talk to you about one of your new soldiers. The Kite has 3 new recruits, and 2 of them will be under you." Sagan bristled. "They will, and that's a problem. I had only 1 hole in my squad, but I have 2 replacements. You took one of my veterans to make room." Sagan remembered the helpless look on Will Lister's face when his transfer order to the Peregrine came through. "The Peregrine is a new ship, and it needs some experienced hands," Zillard said. "I assure you there are other squad leaders on other ships just as irritated as you. The Kite had to give up one of its veterans, and as it happens, I had a recruit I wanted to place under you. So I had the Peregrine take one of yours." Sagan opened her mouth to complain again, then thought better of it and clammed up, stewing. Zillard watched the play of emotions on her face. Most Special Forces soldiers would have said the first thing that came into their heads, an artifact of not having social niceties banged into their head through a childhood and adolescence. Sagan's self-control was one of the reasons why she had come to Zillard's attention. That and other factors. "Which recruit are we talking about?" Sagan said, finally. "Jared Durack," Zillard said. "What's so special about him?" Sagan asked. "He's got Charles Boutin's brain in him," Zillard said, and watched again as Sagan fought back an immediate, visceral response. "And you think this is a good idea?" is what eventually came out of her mouth. "It gets better," Zillard said, and sent over Durack's entire classified file, complete with technical material. Sagan sat silently, digesting the material. Zillard sat, watching the junior officer. After a minute, one of the mess staff approached their table and asked if there was anything they needed. Zillard ordered tea. Sagan ignored the waiter. "All right, I'll bite," Sagan said, after she was done examining the file. "Why are you sticking me with a traitor?" "Bhutan's the traitor," Zillard said. "Dirac has just got his brain." "A brain that you tried to imprint with the traitor's consciousness," Sagan said. "Yes," Zillard said. "I submit the question to your attention once more," Sagan said. "Because you have experience with this sort of thing," Zillard said. "With traitors?" Sagan asked, confused. "With unconventional Special Forces members," Zillard said. "You once temporarily had a real-born member of the CDF under your command, John Perry." Sagan stiffened slightly at the name. Zillard noted it, but chose not to comment. "He did quite well under you," Zillard said. This last sentence was a bit of an ironic understatement. During the Battle of Coral, Perry carried Sagan's unconscious and injured body over several hundred meters of battlefield to get her medical attention, and then located a key piece of enemy technology as the building it was in collapsed around him. "The credit for that goes to Perry, not me," Sagan said. Zillard sensed another play of emotion from Sagan at Perry's name, but again left it on the table. "You are too modest," Zillard said, and paused as the waiter delivered the tea. "My point is, Dirac is something of a hybrid," he continued. "He's Special Forces, but he may also be something else. I want someone who has experience with something else." "Something else," Sagan repeated. "General, am I hearing that you think Bhutan's consciousness is actually somewhere inside Dirac?" "I didn't say that," Zillard said, in a tone that implied that perhaps he had. Sagan considered this, and addressed the implicit rather than the expressed. "You are aware, of course, that the Kite's next series of missions will have us engaging both the RA and the Enisha," she said. "The Enisha missions in particular are ones of great delicacy." "And ones I needed Will Lister for," Sagan thought, but did not say. "I am, of course, aware," Zillard agreed, and reached for his tea. "You don't think having someone with a possibly emergent traitor's personality might be a risk?" Sagan said. "A risk not only to his mission, but to others serving with him?" "Obviously it's a risk," Zillard said, "for which I rely on your experience to deal with. But he may also turn out to be a trove of critical information, which will also need to be dealt with. In addition to everything else, you're an intelligence officer. You're the ideal officer for this soldier." "What did Crick have to say about this?" Sagan said, referring to Major Crick, the commanding officer of the Kite. "He didn't have anything to say about it because I haven't told him," Zillard said. "This is need-to-know material, and I've decided he doesn't need to know. As far as he knows, he simply has 3 new soldiers." "I don't like this," Sagan said. "I don't like this at all." "I didn't ask you to like it," Zillard said. "I'm telling you to deal with it." He sipped his tea. "I don't want him playing a critical role in any of the missions that deal with the RA or the Enisha," Sagan said. "You'll treat him no differently from any other soldier under your command," Zillard said. "Then he could get killed like any other soldier," Sagan said. "Then for your sake, you better hope it's not by friendly fire," Zillard said, and set down his cup. Sagan was silent again. The waiter approached. Zillard impatiently waved him off. "I want to show this file to someone," Sagan said, pointing to her head. "It's classified, for obvious reasons," Zillard said. "Everyone who needs to know about it already does, and we don't want to spread it around to anyone else. Even Dirac doesn't know about his own history. We want to keep it that way." "You're asking me to take on a soldier who has the capability to be an immense security risk," Sagan said. "The least you can do is let me prepare myself. I know a specialist in human brain function and brain-pal integration. I think his insights on this could be useful." Zillard considered this. "This is someone you trust?" he said. I can trust him with this, Sagan said. You know his security clearance? Zilrod asked. I do, Sagan said. Is it high enough for something like this? Well, Sagan said, that's where things get interesting. Hello, Lieutenant Sagan, Administrator Kynan said, in English. The pronunciation was bad, but that was hardly Kynan's fault. His mouth was not well formed for most human languages. Hello, Administrator, Sagan said. You're learning our language. Yes, Kynan said. I have time to learn and little to do. Kynan pointed to a book written in Chakan, the predominant RA language, nestled next to a PDA. Only 2 books here in Chakan. I had choice of language book or religion book. I chose language. Human religion is... Kynan searched his small store of English words. Harder? Sagan nodded toward the PDA. Now that you have a computer, you should have more reading options. Yes, Kynan said. Thank you for getting that to me. It makes me happy. You're welcome, Sagan said. But the computer comes with a price. I know, Kynan said. I have read files you asked me to read. And? Sagan said. I must change to Chakan, Kynan said. My English does not have many words. All right, Sagan said. I've looked at the files concerning private direct in depth, Kynan said, in the harsh but rapid confidence of the Chakan language. Charles Buchanan was a genius for finding a way to preserve the consciousness wave outside of the brain. And you people are idiots for how you try to stuff that consciousness back in. Idiots, Sagan said, and cracked the smallest of smiles, the translation of the word in Chakan coming from a small speaker attached to a lanyard around her neck. Is that your professional assessment or just an editorial comment? It's both, Kynan said. Tell me why, Sagan said. Kynan moved to send files from his PDA to her, but Sagan held up her hand. I don't need the technical details, she said. I just want to know if this Dirac is going to be a danger to my troops and my mission. All right, Kynan said, and paused for a moment. The brain, even a human one, is like a computer. It's not a perfect analogy, but it works for what I'm going to tell you. Computers have 3 components for their operation. There's the hardware, there's the software, and there's the data file. The software runs on the hardware, and the file runs on the software. The hardware can't open the file without the software. If you place a file on a computer that lacks the necessary software, all it can do is sit there. Do you understand me? So far, Sagan said. Good, Kynan said. He reached over and tapped Sagan on the head. She suppressed an urge to snap off his finger. Follow. The brain is the hardware. The consciousness is the file. But with your friend Dirac, you're missing the software. What's the software? Sagan asked. Memory, Kynan said. Experience, sensory activity. When you put Bhutan's consciousness into his brain, that brain lacked the experience to make any sense of it. If that consciousness is still in Dirac's brain, it's isolated, and there's no way to access it. Newborn Special Forces soldiers are conscious from the moment they are woken up, Sagan said. But we also lack experience and memory. That's not consciousness they're experiencing, Kynan said. And Sagan could sense the disgust in his voice. Your damned brain pal forces open sensory channels artificially and offers the illusion of consciousness, and your brain knows it. Kynan pointed to his PDA again. People gave me a rather wide range of access to brain and brain pal research. Did you know this? I did, Sagan said. I asked them to let you look at any file you needed to help me. Because you knew that I would be a prisoner for the rest of my life, and that even if I could escape, I would soon be dead of the disease you gave me. so it couldn't hurt to give me access, Kynan said. Sagan shrugged. Kynan said, and continued. Do you know that there's no explainable reason why a Special Forces soldier's brain absorbs information so much more quickly than a regular CDF? They're both unaltered human brains. They're both the same brain-powered computer. Special Forces brains are preconditioned in a different way from the regular soldiers' brains, but not in a way that should noticeably speed up the rate at which the brains process information. And yet, the Special Forces brain sucks down information and processes it at an incredible rate. Do you know why? It's defending itself, Lieutenant. Your average CDF soldier already has a consciousness and the experience to use it. You Special Forces soldiers have nothing. Your brain senses the artificial consciousness your brain pal is pressing on it and rushes to build its own as quickly as it can before that artificial consciousness permanently deforms it or kills it. No Special Forces soldiers have died because of their brain pal, Jane said. Oh, no, not now, Kynan said. But I wonder what you would find if you went back far enough. What do you know? Sagan asked. I know nothing, Kynan said, mildly. It's merely idle speculation, but the point here is that you can't compare Special Forces waking up with consciousness with what you were trying to do with Private Dirac. It's not the same thing. It's not even close. Sagan changed the subject. You said that it's possible Bhutan's consciousness might not even be in Dirac's brain anymore, she said. It's possible, Kynan said. The consciousness needs input. Without it, it dissipates. That's one reason why it's nearly impossible to keep a consciousness pattern coherent outside the brain, and why Bhutan is a genius for doing it. My suspicion is that if Bhutan's consciousness was in there, it's already leaked away. You've got just another soldier on your hands. But there's no way to tell whether it's in there or not. Its pattern could be subsumed by Private Dirac's consciousness. If it is in there, what would wake it up? Sagan asked. You're asking me to speculate? Kynan asked. Sagan nodded. The reason you couldn't access the Bhutan consciousness in the first place is that the brain didn't have memory and experience. Maybe as your Private Dirac accumulates experiences, one will be close enough in its substance to unlock some part of that consciousness. And then he'd become Charles Bhutan, Sagan said. He might, Kynan said, or he might not. Private Dirac has his own consciousness now, his own sense of self. If Bhutan's consciousness woke up, it wouldn't be the only consciousness in there. It's up to you to decide whether that's good or bad, Lieutenant Sagan. I can't tell you that, or what would truly happen if Bhutan got woken up. Those are the things I needed you to tell me, Sagan said. Kynan gave the array equivalent of a chuckle. Get me a lab, he said. Then I might be able to give you some answers. I thought you said you would never help us, Sagan said. Kynan switched back to English. Much time to think, he said. Too much time. Language lessons, not enough. And then back to Chicano. And this doesn't help you against my people, but it helps you. Me, Sagan said. I know why you helped me this time. I bribed you with computer access. Why would you help me beyond this? I made you a prisoner. And you struck me with a disease that will kill me if I don't get a daily dose of antidote from my enemies, Kynan said. He reached into the shallow desk, molded from the wall of the cell, and pulled out a small injector. My medicine, he said. They allow me to self-administer. Once I decided not to inject myself, to see if they would let me die. I'm still here, so that's the answer to that. But they let me writhe on the floor for hours first. Just like you did, come to think of it. None of this explains why you would want to help me, Sagan said. Because you remembered me, Kynan said. To everyone else, I am just another one of your many enemies, barely worth providing a book to keep me from going insane with boredom. One day, they could simply forget my antidote and let me die, and it would be all the same to them. you at least see me as having value. The very small universe I live in now, that makes you my best and only friend, enemy though you are." Sagan stared at Kynan, remembering the haughtiness of him the first time they met. He was pitiful and craven now, and that momentarily struck Sagan as the saddest thing she had ever seen. "I'm sorry," she said, and was surprised the words came out of her mouth. Another RA chuckled from Kynan. "We were planning to destroy your people, Lieutenant," Kynan said, "and we still might. You needn't feel too apologetic." Sagan had nothing to say to that. She signaled to the brig officer that she was ready to leave. A guard came and stood with an MP while the cell door opened. As the door slid shut behind her, she turned back to Kynan. "Thank you for your help. I will ask about a lab," she said. "Thank you," Kynan said. "I won't get my hopes up." "That's probably a good idea," Sagan said. "And, Lieutenant," Kynan said, "a thought. Your private Dirac will be participating in your military actions." "Yes," Sagan said. "Watch him," Kynan said. "Inhumans and RA both, the stress of battle leaves permanent marks on our brains. It's a primal experience. If Bhutan is still in there, it might be war that brings him out, either by itself or through some combination of experiences." "How do you suggest I watch him in battle?" Sagan asked. "That's your department," Kynan said. "Except for when you captured me, I've never been to war. I couldn't begin to tell you. But if you're worried about Dirac, that's what I would do if I were you. You humans have an expression, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. It seems like your private Dirac could be both. I'd keep him very close indeed." The Kite caught the RA cruiser napping. The skip drive was a touchy piece of technology. It made interstellar travel possible not by propelling ships faster than the speed of light, which was impossible, but by punching through space-time and placing spaceships, or anything equipped with a skip drive, into any spot within that universe those using the skip drive pleased. Actually, this wasn't exactly true. On a logarithmic scale, skip drive travel became less reliable the more space there was between the initiation point and the destination point. The cause of what was called the skip drive horizon problem was not entirely understood, but its effects were lost ships and crews. This kept humans and other races that used the skip drive in the same interstellar neighborhood as their home planets in the short run. If a race wanted to keep control of its colonies, as almost all did, its colonial expansion was ruled by the sphere defined by the skip drive horizon. In one sense, this point was moot. Thanks to the intense competition for real estate in the neighborhood humanity lived in, no intelligent race, save one, had a reach that came close to its own skip drive horizon. The exception was the Khonsu, whose technology was so advanced relative to the other races in the local space that it was an open question as to whether it used the skip drive at all. Among the many quirks of the skip drive, which had to be tolerated if one were to employ it, were its departure and arrival needs. When departing, the skip drive needed relatively flat space-time, which meant the skip drive could only be activated when the ship using it was well outside the gravity well of close-by planets. This required travel in space using engines. But a ship using the skip drive could arrive as close to a planet as it wanted. It could even, theoretically, arrive on a planet's surface, if a navigator confident enough of his or her skill could be found to do it. While landing a spacecraft on a planet via skip drive navigation was officially and strongly discouraged by the Colonial Union, the Colonial Defense Forces recognized the strategic value of sudden and unexpected arrivals. When the Kite arrived over the planet its human settlers called Gettysburg, it popped into existence within a quarter of a light second from the RA cruiser, and with its dual railguns warmed up and ready to fire. It took the Kite's prepared weapons crew less than a minute to orient and target the hapless cruiser. which only at the end could be seen trying to respond, and the magnetized railgun projectiles needed less than 2 1/3 seconds to travel the distance between the kite and its quarry. The sheer speed of the railgun projectiles was more than sufficient to pierce the hide of the RA craft and tunnel through its innards like a bullet through soft butter. But the projectile designers hadn't left it at that. The projectiles themselves were designed to expand explosively at the nearest contact with matter. An infinitesimal fraction of a second after the projectiles penetrated the RA craft, they fragmented, and shards vectored crazily relative to their initial trajectory, turning the projectile into this universe's fastest shotgun blast. The expenditure of energy required to change these trajectories was naturally immense and slowed down the shards considerably. However, the shards had energy to spare, and it simply meant each shard had more time to damage the RA vessel before it exited the wounded ship and began a long and frictionless journey through space. Thanks to the relative positions of the kite and the RA cruiser, the first railgun projectile struck the RA cruiser forward and starboard. The fragments from this projectile tunneled through diagonally and upward, not so cleanly chewing through several levels of the ship and turning a number of the RA crew into bloody mist. The entrance wound of this projectile was a clean circle 17 centimeters wide. The exit wound was a ragged hole 10 meters wide with a gout of metal, flesh, and atmosphere blasting silently into the vacuum. The second railgun projectile entered aft of the first, following a parallel directory, but failed to fragment. Its exit wound was only marginally larger than its entrance wound. It made up for this failure by breaching one of the engines of the RA craft. The cruiser's automatic damage controls slammed down bulkheads, isolating the damaged engine, and took the other 2 engines offline to avoid a cascading failure. The RA ship was switched to emergency power, which offered it only a minimum of offensive and defensive options, none of which would be at all effective against the kite. The kite, its own power partially drained but recharging through the use of the railguns, sealed the deal by launching 5 conventional tactical nuclear missiles at the RA cruiser. It would take them more than a minute to reach the cruiser, but the kite now had the luxury of time. The cruiser was the only RA ship in the area. A small flash issued forth from the RA ship. The doomed cruiser was launching a skip drone, designed to quickly get to skip distance and let the rest of the RA military know what happened to it. The kite launched a 6th and final missile toward the drone, which would be overtaken and destroyed less than 10,000 clicks from skip distance. By the time the RA found out about their cruiser, the kite would be light years away. Presently, the RA cruiser was an expanding debris field, and Lieutenant Sagan and her 2nd platoon received their clearance for their part of the mission. Jared tried to calm the first mission nerves and the mild fear brought by the choppiness of the troop transport's descent into the Gettysburg atmosphere by trying to close out distractions and focus his energies. Daniel Harvey, sitting next to him, was making that difficult. "Goddamn wildcat colonists," Harvey said, as the troop transport plunged through the atmosphere. "They go off and build illegal colonies and then come crying to us when some other fucking species is crawling up their holes." "Relax, Harvey," said Alex Rankin. "You're going to give yourself a migraine." "What I want to know is how these fuckers even managed to get to these places," Harvey said. "The Colonial Union doesn't bring them out here, and you can't go anywhere without CU say-so." "Sure you can," Rankin said. "The CU doesn't control all interstellar travel, just the travel that humans do." "These colonists are human, Einstein," Harvey said. "Hey," said Julie Einstein, "leave me out of this." "It's just an expression, Julie," Harvey said. "The colonists are human, but the people who are transporting them aren't, you idiot," Rankin said. "Wildcat colonists buy transport from aliens the CU trades with, and the aliens take them where they want to go." "That's stupid," Harvey said, and looked around the platoon for agreement. Most of the platoon were either resting with their eyes closed or studiously avoiding the discussion. Harvey had a reputation as an argumentative blowhard. The CU could stop that if they wanted to. Tell the aliens to stop picking up wildcat passengers. That would save us from having to risk getting our asses shot off. From the forward seat, Jane Sagan turned her head toward Harvey. The CU doesn't want to stop wildcat colonists, she said, in a bored tone. Why the hell not? Harvey asked. They're troublemakers, Sagan said. The sort of person who will defy the CU and start a wildcat colony is the sort of person who could cause trouble at home if he wasn't allowed to go. The CU figures it's not worth the trouble, so they let them go and look the other way. Then they're on their own. Until they get in trouble, Harvey sneered. Usually even then, Sagan said. Wildcatters know what they're getting into. Then what are we doing here? Rentgen said. Not to take Harvey's side, but these are wildcat colonists. Orders, Sagan said, and closed her eyes, ending the discussion. Harvey snorted and was about to reply when the turbulence suddenly became especially bad. Looks like the RA on the ground just figured out we're up here, Chad Assisi said from the pilot seat. We've got 3 more missiles on their way. Hang on. I'm going to try to burn them before they get too close. Several seconds later came a low, solid hum. The transport's defensive maser fired up to deal with the missiles. Why don't we just plaster these guys from orbit? Harvey said. We've done that before. There are humans down there, aren't there? Jared said, venturing a comment. I guess we'd want to avoid using tactics that would injure or kill them. Harvey gave Jared the briefest of glances and then changed the subject. Jared glanced over to Sarah Pauling, who gave him a shrug. In the week they had been attached to the 2nd Platoon, the best adjective to describe relations was frosty. Other members of the platoon were diffidently polite when forced to be, but otherwise ignored the 2 of them whenever possible. Jane Sagan, the platoon's superior officer, let them know briefly that this was par for the course for new recruits until their first combat mission. Just deal with it, she said, and returned to work of her own. It made both Jared and Pauling uneasy. Being casually ignored was one thing, but the 2 of them were also denied full integration with the platoon. They were likely connected and shared a common band for discussion and sharing information concerning the upcoming mission, but the intimate sharing offered by their training squad was not in evidence here. Jared looked back at Harvey and, not for the first time, wondered if integration was simply a training tool. If it was, it seemed cruel to offer it to people only to take it away later. But he'd seen evidence of integration among his platoon mates. The subtle movements and actions that suggested an unspoken common dialogue and a sensory awareness beyond one's own senses. Jared and Pauling yearned for it, but also knew the lack of it was a test to see how they would respond. To combat the lack of integration with their platoon, Jared and Pauling's integration was defensively intimate. They spent so much time in each other's heads that by the end of the week, despite their affection together, they were very nearly sick of each other. There was, they discovered, such a thing as too much integration. The 2 of them diluted their sharing slightly by inviting Stephen Seaborg to integrate with them informally. Seaborg, who had been receiving the same cold shoulder from the 1st platoon, but who had no training mates in the platoon to keep him company, was almost pathetically grateful for the offer. Jared glanced down at Jane Sagan and wondered if the platoon leader would tolerate having him and Sarah unintegrated during the mission. It seemed dangerous. For him and Pauling, at the very least. As if responding to his thoughts, Sagan glanced up at him and then spoke. Assignments, she said, and sent a map of the tiny Gettysburg colony to the platoon with their assignments overlaid. Remember, this is a sweep and clean. There's been no skip drone activity, so either they're all dead or they're all herded somewhere where they can't get a message out. The idea is to clean out the array with a minimum of structural damage to the colony. That's minimal, Harvey? Staring pointedly at the soldier who squirmed uncomfortably. I don't mind blowing things up when necessary, but anything we destroy is something these settlers have less of. What? Rentgen said. Are you seriously suggesting we're going to let these people stay? If they're still alive? They're wildcatters, Sagan said. We can't force them to act intelligently. Well, we could force them, Harvey said. We won't force them, Sagan said. We have new people to take under our wings. Rentgen, you're responsible for Pauling. I'll take Dirac. The rest of you, 2 by 2 to your assignments. We land here. A small landing zone illuminated. And I'll let you use your own creativity to get to where you need to be. Remember to note your surroundings and the enemy. You're looking for all of us. Or at least some of us, Pauling said privately to Jared. Then both of them felt the sensuous rush of integration, the hyper-awareness of having so many points of view overlaid on one's own. Jared struggled to control a gasp. Don't cream yourself, Harvey said, and there were a few pings of amusement in the platoon. Jared ignored this and drank in the emotional and informational gestalt offered by his platoon mates. The confidence in their abilities to confront the RA, a substrat of early planning for their paths to their mission destinations, a tense and subtle anticipatory excitement that seemed to have little to do with the combat to come, and shared communal feeling that taking care to keep structures intact was pointless, since the colonists were almost certainly dead already. Behind you, Jerry heard Sarah Pauling say, and he and Jane Sagan turned and fired, even as they received the image and data, from Pauling's distant point of view, of 3 array soldiers moving silently but not invisibly around a small general-purpose building to ambush the pair. The trio stepped out into a hail of bullets from Jared and Sagan. One dropped dead, while the other 2 broke and ran in separate directions. Jared and Sagan quickly polled the viewpoints of the other members of the platoon to see who might pick up one or both of the fleeing soldiers. Everyone else was engaged, including Pauling, who had returned to her primary task of flushing out an array sniper on the edge of the Gettysburg settlement. Sagan audibly sighed. Get that one, she said, taking off after the second. Try not to get killed. Jared followed the RA soldier, who used its powerful bird-like legs to build a considerable lead on him. As Jared raced to catch up, the RA spun and shot wildly at him with a one-handed grip on its weapon. The kick knocked the gun up and out of the RA's hand. The bullets spat out dirt directly in front of Jared, who veered for cover as the weapon clattered to the ground. The RA ran on without retrieving its weapon and disappeared into the colony's motor pool garage. I could use some help, Jared said, at the bay of the garage. Join the club, Harvey said from somewhere. These fuckers outnumber us at least 2 to 1. Jared entered the garage through the bay. The quick glance showed that the only other way out was a door on the same wall as the bay and one of a series of windows designed to ventilate the garage. The windows were both high and small. It seemed unlikely the RA had gone through those. It was still somewhere inside the garage. Jared moved to one side and started a methodical search of the shop. A knife shot out from a tarp on a low shelf and slashed Jared in his calf. The nanobiotic fabric of Jared's military unitard stiffened where the knife blade made contact. Jared didn't receive a scratch, but his own shock movement tripped him up. He went sprawling on the floor, ankle twisted, his MP clattering out of his hand. The RA scrambled out of his hiding place before Jared could get to it, clambered over Jared and pushed the MP with the fist that still held the knife. The MP danced out of reach, and the RA stabbed Jared's face, cutting him savagely in the cheek and drawing smart blood. Jared yelled. The RA scrambled off him and toward the MP. When Jared spun around, the RA had the MP trained on him, its elongated fingers awkwardly but solidly on the stalk and trigger. Jared froze. The RA squawked something and pulled the trigger. Nothing. Jared remembered that the MP was trained to his brain power. It wouldn't fire for a non-human. He cracked a smile in relief. The RA squawked again and jammed the MP hard into Jared's face, tearing into the cheek it had already slashed. Jared screamed and scrambled back in pain. The RA threw the MP onto a high shelf out of reach of both of them. It reached onto a counter to grab a tire rod and advanced on Jared, swinging viciously. Jared blocked the swing with his arm. His unitard stiffened again, but the hit made his arm ache in pain. On the next swing, he reached to grab the rod, but misjudged the speed of the approach. The rod came down hard on his fingers, breaking bones in the ring and middle fingers of his right hand, and driving down his arm. The RA moved the iron sideways and clocked Jared in the head with it. He went down to his knees, dazed, retwisting the ankle he had fallen on earlier. Jared groggily went for his combat knife with his left hand. The RA kicked the hand, hard, sending the knife spinning out of his grip. A second rapid kick tapped Jared on the chin, driving his teeth into his tongue, causing smart blood to spurt into his mouth and over his teeth. The RA pushed him over, pulled out its knife, and bent down to cut Jared's throat. Jared's mind suddenly ricocheted back to a training session with Sarah Pauling, when she straddled him with her knife on his throat and told him he lacked focus. He focused now. Jared sucked in suddenly and spat a goblet of smart blood at the RA's face and eye band. The creature recoiled, revulsed, giving Jared the time he needed to instruct his brain pal to do with the smart blood on the RA's face what it did when it was ingested by the blood-sucking bug on Phoenix. Combust. The RA screamed as the smart blood began to burn into its face and eye band, dropping its knife as it clawed at its face. Jared grabbed the knife and drove it into the side of the RA's head. The RA issued an abrupt, surprised cluck, and then went boneless, slumping backwards on the floor. Jared followed its example, lying silently, doing nothing but resting his eyes and becoming more and more aware of the heavy, acrid smell of smoldering RA. "Get up," someone said to him some time later, and prodded him with a boot toe. Jared winced and looked up. It was Sagan. "Come on, Drac, we got them all. You can come out now." "I hurt," Jared said. "Hell, Drac," Sagan said. "I hurt just looking at you." She motioned over to the RA. "Next time, just shoot the damn thing." "I'll keep that in mind," Jared said. "Speaking of which," Sagan said, "where's your MP?" Jared looked up at the high shelf the RA had flung it onto. "I think I need a ladder," Jared said. "You need stitches," Sagan said. "Your cheek is about to come off." "Lieutenant," Julie Einstein said, "you're going to want to come over here. We found the settlers." "Any of them alive?" Sagan said. "God, no," Einstein said. And through the integration, both Sagan and Jared felt her shudder. "Where are you?" Sagan asked. Einstein said. "Maybe you should come and see." A minute later, Sagan and Jared were at the colony slaughterhouse. "Fucking RA," Sagan said as they walked out. She turned to Einstein, who was waiting outside for her. "They're in here?" "They're here," Einstein said. "In the cold room in the back." "All of them?" Sagan asked. "I think so. It's hard to tell," Einstein said. "They're mostly in parts." The cold room was crammed with meat. Special Forces soldiers gaped up at the skinned torsos on hooks. Barrels below the hooks were filled with offal. Limbs in various states of processing lay stacked on tables. On a separate table lay a collection of heads, skulls sawed open to extract the brains. Discarded heads rested in another barrel next to the table. A small pile of unprocessed bodies was heaped under a tarp. Jared went to uncover it. Children lay underneath. "Christ," Sagan said. She turned to Einstein. "Get someone over to the colony administration offices," she said. "Pull up any medical and genetic records you can find and pictures of the colonists. We're going to need them to identify people. Then get a couple of people to dig through trash cans." "What are we looking for?" Einstein asked. "Scraps," Sagan said. "Whoever the RA already ate." Jared heard Sagan give her orders as a buzz in his head. He crouched and stared, transfixed, at the pile of small bodies. At the top lay the body of a small girl, elfin features silent, relaxed, and beautiful. He reached over and gently touched the girl's cheek. It was ice cold. Unaccountably, Jared felt a hard stab of grief. He turned away with a retching sob. Daniel Harvey, who had found the cold room with Einstein, stood over Jared. "First time," he said. Jared looked up. "What?" he said. Harvey motioned to the bodies with his head. "This is the first time you've seen children, am I right?"
Yes,
Jared said. "This is how it happens with us," Harvey said. "First time we see colonists, they're dead. First time we see children, they're dead. First time we see an intelligent creature who isn't human, it's dead or trying to kill us, so we have to kill it. Then it's dead. It took me months before I saw a live colonist. I've never seen a live child." Jared turned back to the pile. "How old is this one?" he asked. "Shit, I don't know," Harvey said, but looked anyway. "I guess 3 or 4 years old, 5 tops. And you know what's funny? She was older than both of us put together. She was older than both of us put together twice. Yeah, it's a fucked up universe, my friend." Harvey wandered away. Jared stared at the little girl for another minute, then covered her and the pile with the tarp. He went looking for Sagan, who he found outside the colony's administration building. "Dirac," Sagan said as he approached, "what do you think of your first mission?" "I think it's pretty awful," Jared said. "That it is," Sagan said. "Do you know why we're here? Why we're out here at a wildcat settlement?" she asked him. It took Jared a second to realize she had spoken the words out loud. "No," he said, responding in kind. "Because the leader of this settlement is the son of the Secretary of State for the Colonial Union," Sagan said. "The dumb bastard wanted to prove to his mother that the Colonial Union regulations against wildcat settlements were an affront to civil rights." "Are they?" Jared asked. Sagan looked over at Jared. "Why do you ask?" "I'm just curious," Jared said. "Maybe they are, and maybe they aren't," Sagan said. "But either way, the last place to prove that point would have been this planet. It's been claimed by the RA for years, even if they didn't have a settlement on it. I guess the asshole thought that because the CU beat the RA in the last war, maybe they'd look the other way for fear of retaliation. Then 10 days ago, the spy satellite we put in over the planet got shot out of the sky by that cruiser we took out. It got a picture of the cruiser first. And here we are." "It's a mess," Jared said. Sagan laughed mirthlessly. "Now I've got to go back into that fucking cold room and test corpses until I find the secretary's son," she said. "Then I'll have the pleasure of telling her that the RA chopped up her son and his family for food." "His family?" Jared asked. "Wife," Sagan said. "And a daughter, 4 years old." Jared shuddered violently, thinking of the girl on the pile. Sagan watched him intently. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," Jared said. "It just seems a waste." "The wife and kid are a waste," Sagan said. "The dumb bastard who brought them here got what he deserved." Jared shuddered again. "If you say so," he said. "I do say so," Sagan said. "Now come on. Time to identify the colonists, or what's left of them." "Well," Sarah Pauling said to Jared as he came out of the Kite's infirmary, "you sure don't do things the easy way." She reached out to his cheek, to the welt that remained there despite the nano-stitching. "You can still see where you got cut." "It doesn't hurt," Jared said. "Which is more than I can say about my ankle and my hand. The ankle wasn't broken, but the fingers will take a couple of days to fully heal." "Better that than being dead," Pauling said. "This is true," Jared admitted. "And you taught everybody a new trick," Pauling said. "Things you didn't know you could do with smart blood. They're calling you Red Hot Jared now." "Everybody knows you can get smart blood to heat up," Jared said. "I saw people using it to fry up bugs on Phoenix all the time." "Yes, everyone uses it to smoke the little bugs," Pauling said. "But it takes a certain kind of mind to think of using it to smoke the big bugs." I wasn't really thinking about it, Jared said. I just didn't want to die. Funny how that will make a person creative, Pauling said. Funny how it makes you focus, Jared said. I remembered you telling me I needed to work on that. I think you may have saved my life. Good, Pauling said. Try to return the favor sometime. Jared stopped walking for a moment. What? Pauling asked. Do you feel that? Jared asked. Feel what? Pauling asked. I'm feeling like I really want to have sex, Jared said. Well, Jared, Pauling said, you stopping abruptly in a hallway is not usually how I know you really want to have sex. Pauling, direct, Alex Rentgen said. Rec room. Now, time for a little after-battle celebration. Ooh, Pauling said. A celebration? Maybe there will be cake and ice cream. There was no cake or ice cream. There was an orgy. All the members of the second platoon were there, save one, in various stages of undress. Couples and trios lay on couches and cushions, kissing and pressing into each other. This is an after-battle celebration? Pauling asked. The after-battle celebration, Alex Rentgen said. Every battle we do this. Why? Jared asked. Alex Rentgen stared at Jared, mildly incredulous. You actually need a reason to have an orgy? Jared began to respond, but Rentgen held up his hand. One, because we've been through the valley of the shadow of death and come through the other side. And there's no better way to feel alive than this. And after the shit we've seen today, we need to get our minds off it right quick. Two, because as great as sex is, it's even better when everyone you're integrated with is doing it at the same time. So, this means you're not going to pull the plug on our integration? Pauling asked. She said it teasingly, but Jared sensed the smallest thread of anxiety in the question. No, Rentgen said, gently. You're one of us now, and it's not just sex. It's a deeper expression of communion and trust, another level of integration. That sounds suspiciously like bullshit to me, Pauling said, smiling. Rentgen sent a ping of high amusement. Well, I won't deny that we're in it for the sex too, but you'll see. He held out a hand to Pauling. Shall we? Pauling looked over at Jared, winked, and took Rentgen's hand. By all means, she said. Jared watched them walk off, and then felt a poke on his shoulder. He turned. Julie Einstein, nude and perky, stood there. I've come to test the theory that you are red hot, Jared, she said. Some indefinite time later, Pauling found her way to Jared and lay next to him. This has been an interesting evening, she said. That's one way to put it, Jared said. Rentgen's comment that sex was different when everyone with whom you're integrated is involved turned out to be a rather dramatic understatement. Everyone but one, Jared corrected. I wonder why Sagan wasn't here, Jared said. Alex said she used to participate, but now she doesn't, Pauling said. She stopped after a battle where she nearly died. That was a couple of years ago. Alex said participation is strictly optional. No one gives her grief for it. At the name Alex, Jared felt a sharp pang. He had glimpsed Rentgen and Pauling together earlier, while Einstein was on him. That would explain it, Jared said awkwardly. Pauling sat up on an arm. Did you have a good time with this? She asked. Well, you know I did, Jared said. I know, Pauling said. I could feel you in my head. Yes, Jared said. And yet, you don't seem entirely happy, Pauling said. Jared shrugged. I couldn't tell you why, he said. Pauling reached over, kissed Jared lightly. You're cute when you're jealous, she said. I don't mean to be jealous, Jared said. No one means to be jealous, I think, Pauling said. I'm sorry, Jared said. Don't be, Pauline said. I'm happy we've been integrated. I'm pleased to be a part of this platoon, and this is a lot of fun. But you are special to me, Jared. You always have been. You are my best beloved. Best beloved, Jared agreed. Always. Pauline smiled widely. Glad to get that settled, she said, and reached down. Now, she said, time for me to get the benefit of my best beloved privileges. Chapter 7. 30 clicks, Jane Sagan said. Everyone off the bus. The soldiers of the 2nd Platoon removed themselves from the troop transport and fell into the night sky over Durlu, the capital city of the Enishan nation. Below them, explosions pocked the sky. Not the violent, potentially transport-shattering eruptions that would mark anti-craft defenses, but the pretty, multicolored flashes that signaled fireworks. It was the final evening of Chapalan, the Enishan celebration of rebirth and renewal. Enishans worldwide were out in their streets, partying and carrying on in a manner appropriate for the time of day where they were. Most, the Enishan equivalent of slightly drunk and horny. Durlu was especially raucous this Chapalan. In addition to the usual festivities, the celebration this year had also included the consecration of the air, in which Violet Serre, the Enishan hierarch, officially pronounced her daughter Viut Serre as the future ruler of Enisha. To commemorate the consecration, Violet Serre had provided a sample of the royal jelly she fed to Viut Serre and allowed a mass-produced synthetic version to be produced in diluted form, placed in tiny jars and offered as gifts to the citizens of Durlu for the final night of Chapalan. In its natural form and fed to a pre-metamorphic Enishan, the royal jelly caused profound developmental changes that resulted in clear physical and mental advantages once the Enishan developed into adult form. In its diluted and synthesized version, the royal jelly gave adult Enishans a truly excellent hallucinogenic buzz. Most of the citizens of Durlu had consumed their jelly prior to the city's fireworks display and light show, and were now sitting in their private gardens and public parks, clacking their mouthpieces together in an Enishan equivalent of ooh and ah, as the naturally brilliant and explosive nature of the fireworks was pharmaceutically extended across the entire Enishan sensory spectrum. 30 clicks up and descending rapidly, Jared could not see or hear the dazzled Enishans, and the fireworks below were brilliant but distant, the sound of their explosions lost in the distance and the thin Enishan stratosphere. Jared's perception was occupied with other things: the location of his squad mates, the rate of his descent, and the maneuvering required to ensure he was both where he needed to be at landing and yet well out of the way when certain events transpired not too far in the future. Locating his squad mates was the easiest task. Every member of the 2nd Platoon was blanked out visually and through most of the electromagnetic spectrum by their black-body nanobiotic unitards and equipment covers, save for a small tight-beam transmitter receiver each platoon member wore. These pulled the position of the other platoon members before the jump and continued doing so at microsecond intervals since. Jared knew that Sarah Pauling was 40 meters fore and starboard, Daniel Harvey 60 meters below, and Jane Sagan 200 meters above, the last out of their transport. The first time Jared participated in a nighttime high-altitude jump, not long after Gettysburg, he managed to lose the tight beam signal and landed several clicks away from his squad, disoriented and alone. He received no end of shit for that. Jared's final destination lay now less than 25 clicks below him, highlighted by his rain power, which also offered up a descent pathway computed to get him where he needed to be. The pathway was updated on the fly as the brain power took into consideration wind gusts and other atmospheric phenomena. It also tracked carefully around 3 closely grouped virtual columns, superimposed on Jared's vision,
These columns stretched down from the heavens to terminate in 3 areas of a single building: the Hierarch's Palace, which served as both the residence of Philipsera and her court, and the official seat of the government. What these 3 columns represented became apparent when Jared and the second platoon had descended to less than 4 kilometers, and 3 particle beams appeared in the sky,
lancing downward from the satellites the Special Forces had positioned in low orbit above Anisha.
One beam was dim, one furiously bright, and the third was dimmest of all, and with a curious flicker. The citizenry of Dolu cooed over the sight and the resonant thunderclap wall of sound that accompanied their appearance. In their simultaneously heightened
And diminished state of awareness, they thought the beams were part of the city's light show.
only the invaders and the actual coordinators of Dolu's light show initially knew any different. Particle beam producing satellites are not something the Anisha planetary defense grid would fail to notice.
Noticing enemy weapons is what planetary defense grids are for.
In this particular case, however, the satellites were low disguised as a trio of repair tugs. The tugs had been planted months earlier, not long after the incident at Gettysburg, as part of the routine service fleet for the Colonial Union's diplomatic berths at one of Anisha's 3 major space stations. They did, in fact, work perfectly fine as tugs. Their rather unusually modified engines were not apparent externally or by internal systems checks, the latter due to clever software modifications that hid the engine's capabilities to all but the most determined of investigators. The 3 tugs had been assigned to haul in the kite after the ship appeared in Anishan space and asked for permission to repair damage done to its hull and systems after a recent battle with a array cruiser.
The kite had won the exchange, but had to retreat before its
Damage to be totally repaired. The kite had picked a fight at one of the array's more moderately defended colonies, where the military strength was strong enough to repel a single Special Forces craft, but not strong enough to blast it wholly out of the sky. A routine courtesy tour of the kite to the Anishan military was offered by its commander, but declined as a matter of course by the Anishan military, who had already confirmed the kite's story through its informal intelligence channels with the RA. The kite also asked for and received permission from members of its crew to have shore leave at Tresh, a resort that had been set aside for Colonial Union diplomats and staff stationed on Anisha. Tresh lay to the southeast of Dolu, which was just north of the flight path the troop transport carrying 2 squads worth of vacationing members of the 2nd Platoon had filed. As the troop transport passed near Dolu, it reported an atmospheric disturbance and changed course northward to avoid chop, edging briefly into the no-fly zone over the Dolu airspace. Anishan Transport Command noted the correction, but required the transport to return to its previous flight plan as soon as it edged past the turbulence. The transport did its load 2 squads lighter a few minutes later. It was interesting what you could do when your enemy was officially your ally, and unaware you knew it was your enemy. The particle beams seared forth from the tugs assigned to the kite and struck the Hierarch's Palace. The first, the strongest of the beams by a significant margin, tore through 6 levels of palace into the guts of the place to vaporize the palace's backup generator and, 20 meters below that, the main power line. Severing the main power line switched the palace's electrical systems to the backup, which had been destroyed milliseconds earlier. In the absence of centralized backup power, various local backups sprang to life and locked down the palace through a system of security doors. The designers of the palace's electrical and security systems reasoned that if both the main power and the backup power were taken down, the entire palace itself would probably be under attack. This was correct as far as it went. What the designers did not expect or intend was for the decentralized system of local backups to play an integral part in the attacker's plans. This beam caused relatively little secondary damage. Its energies were tuned specifically to stay contained within its circumference, and to bore deep into the Inishan ground. The resulting hole was more than 80 yards deep before some of the debris thrown up from the beam's work, and some of the debris from the 6 levels of palace, filled the bottom of the hole to a depth of several meters. The second beam pierced the palace's administrative wing.
Unlike the first beam, this beam was tuned wide and designed to throw off a massive amount of waste heat.
The administrative wing of the palace buckled and sweated where the beam struck. Superheated air tore through the offices, blasting wide doors and windows and igniting everything inside to a combustion point below 932 degrees centigrade. More than 3 dozen Inishan night shift government workers, military guards, and janitors immolated, broiling instantly within their carapaces. The hierarch's private office and everything in it, directly in the focused center of the beam, turned to ash only fractions of a second before the firestorm the beam's heat and energy created blew those ashes to all corners of the rapidly deconstructing wing. The second beam was by far the most destructive, but the least critical of the 3 beams. The Special Forces certainly didn't intend or expect to assassinate the hierarch in her private office. She was rarely in it on any evening, and would absolutely not have been in it on this night, when she was attending to public functions as part of the Cathalan celebrations. She was on the other side of Berlou entirely. It would have been a clumsy attempt at best, but the Special Forces wanted it to look like a clumsy attempt on the hierarch's way, so the hierarch and her immense and formidable personal security detail would be kept far from the palace while the second platoon accomplished its actual goal. The third beam had the lowest power of any of them, and it flickered as it surgically battered away at the roof of the palace, like a surgeon cauterizing, removing skin, one layer at a time. The goal of this beam was not terror or wholesale destruction, but to cut a direct pathway to a palace chamber, in which resided the second platoon's gold, and the lever that, it was hoped, would serve to pry the Inishans out of their tripartite plan to attack humanity. "We're going to kidnap right now?" asked Daniel Harvey. "We're going to kidnap Viewit Sarah," Jane Sagan said, "heir to the Inishan throne." Daniel Harvey gave a look of sheer incredulousness, and Jared was reminded why Special Forces soldiers, despite their integration, actually bothered to meet physically for briefings. In the end, nothing could really top body language. Sagan forwarded the intelligence report on the mission and the mission specs, but Harvey piped up again before the information could unpack completely. "Since when have we gotten into the kidnapping business?" Harvey said. "That's a new wrinkle. We've done abductions before," Sagan said. "This is nothing new. We've abducted adults," Harvey said. "And generally speaking, they've been people who mean us harm. This kidnapping actually involves a kid." "It's more like a grub," said Alex Renton, who by now had unpacked the mission briefing and had begun to go through it. "Whatever," Harvey said. "Grub, kid, child. The point is, we're going to use a young innocent as a bargaining chip. Am I right? And that's the first time we've done that. It's scummy." "This from a guy who usually has to be told not to blow shit up," Renton said. Harvey glanced over to Renton. "That's right," he said. "I usually am the guy you have to tell not to blow shit up, and I'm telling you that this mission stinks. What the fuck is wrong with the rest of you?" "Our enemies don't have the same high standards as you, Harvey," Julie Einstein said, and forwarded a picture of the pile of children's corpses at Gettysburg. Gerald shivered again. "Does that mean we have to have the same low standards as they do?" Harvey said. "Look," Sagan said, "this isn't up to a vote. Our intelligence people tell me the RA, the Inishans, and the Oban are getting close to a big push into our space. We've been harassing the RA and the Oban on the margins, but we haven't been able to move against the Inishans because we're still working under the polite fiction that they're our allies. This has given them the time to prepare, and despite all of the disinformation we've been feeding them, they still know too much about where our weak points are. We've got solid intelligence that says the Inishans are right up front on any plan of attack. If we move against the Inishans openly, all 3 of them will be at our necks, and we don't have the resources to fight them all." Harvey's right.
This mission takes us into new territory,
but none of our alternative plans have the same impact this one does. We can't break the Emichons militarily, but we can break them psychologically. By this time, Jared had absorbed the entire report. We're not stopping with kidnapping, he said to Sagan. No, Sagan said. Kidnapping alone won't be enough to make the hierarch agree to our terms. Christ, Harvey said. He had finally absorbed the entire briefing. This shit stinks. It beats the alternative, Sagan said. Unless you really think the colonial union can take on 3 enemies at once, can I just ask one question?
Said Harvey. Why do we get stuck with this crap? We're special forces, Sagan said. This is the sort of thing we do.
Bullshit,
Harvey said.
You said it yourself. We don't do this. Nobody does this. We're being made to do this because no one else wants to do this.
Harvey looked around in the briefing room.
Come on, we can admit this to ourselves at least, he said. Some real-born asshole in military intelligence thought up this plan, and then a bunch of real-born generals signed off on it, and then the Colonial Defense Force's real-born commanders didn't want to have anything to do with it. So we get it, and everyone thinks we won't mind because we're a bunch of 2-year-old amoral killers. Well, I have morals, and I know everyone in this room does too. I won't back away from a stand-up fight. All of you know that about me. But this isn't a stand-up fight. This is bullshit. First-class bullshit.
All right, it's bullshit, Sagan said. But
This is also our mission.
Don't ask me to be the one who snatches the thing, Harvey said.
I'll have the back of whoever does it. That's one cup I'll ask to have passed from me.
I won't ask you, Sagan said. I'll find something else for you to do. Who are you going to get to do the deed? Alex Rankin said.
I'll do it myself,
Sagan said.
I want 2 volunteers to go with me. I already said I'd have you back,
Harvey said. I need someone who will make the snatch if I get a bullet in the head, Harvey, Sagan said.
I'll do it,
Sarah Pauling said.
Harvey's right that this shit stinks though. Thank you, Pauling,
Harvey said.
You're welcome,
Pauling said. Don't get cocky. That's one, Sagan said. Anyone else?
Everyone in the briefing room turned to look at Jared. What? Jared said, suddenly defensive. Nothing, said Julie Einstein. It's just that you and Pauling are usually a matched pair. That's not true at all, Jared said. We've been with the platoon for 7 months now, and I've had all your backs at one time or another. And you're worked up about it, Einstein said. No one said you were married, and you have had all our backs. But everyone tends to pair off on missions with one person more than others. I get paired with Rankin. Sagan gets stuck with Harvey
because no one else wants to deal with him. You pair up with Pauling, that's all.
Stop teasing Jared, Pauling said, smiling. He's a nice guy, unlike the rest of you degenerates. I'm nice degenerates, Rankin said. Oh, nicely degenerate anyway, said Einstein. If we're all done with our fun, Sagan said, I still need another volunteer. Direct, Harvey prompted. Stop already, Sagan said. No, Jared said. I'll do it. Sagan seemed about to object, but stopped herself. Fine, she said, and then continued on with her briefing. She did it again, Jared said to Pauling on a private channel as the briefing continued. You saw it, didn't you? How she was about to say no? I saw it, Pauling said, but she didn't. And when it comes down to it, she's always treated you just like she treats anyone. I know, Jared said. Just wish I knew why she doesn't seem to like me. She doesn't really seem to like anyone all that much, Pauling said. Stop being paranoid. Anyway, honestly, except when paranoid. Cooler than that, Jared said. There it is, Pauling said. And thank you for volunteering. Wow, you know, Jared said. Give the crowd what they want. Pauling giggled audibly. Sagan shot her a look. Sorry, Pauling said, on a common channel. After a few minutes, Jared hailed Pauling on a private channel. You really think this mission is a bad one? It fucking stinks, Pauling said. The beams ceased, and Jared and the rest of the second pumped their parafolders. Charged nanorods extended in tendrils from backpacks and formed individual riders. Jared, no longer free-falling, took her toward the palace and the smoking hole left by the third beam, a hole that led to the heir's nursery.
At roughly the size of St. Peter's Basilica, the Hierarch's Palace was no small edifice, and outside the main hall where the Hierarch held formal court and the now shattered administrative wing, no non-Enoshans were allowed to enter. There were no architectural plans for the palace in public record, and the palace itself, constructed in a fluid and chaotically natural Enoshon architectural style that resembled nothing so much as a series of termite mounds, did not lend itself to easy discovery of significant areas or rooms. Before the plan to kidnap the Enoshon heir could be put into action, it had to be discovered where the heir's private chambers lay. Military research considered it a pretty puzzle, but one without a lot of time to be solved. Their solution was to think small. Indeed, to think single-celled, to think of C. xavieri, an Enoshon prokaryotic organism evolutionarily parallel to bacteria. Just as strains of bacteria live in happily symbiotic relationships with humans, so did C. xavieri with Enoshons, primarily internally, but also externally. Like many humans, not all Enoshons were fastidious about their bathroom habits. Colonial Union military research cracked C. xavieri open and resequenced it to create the subspecies C. xavieri novera, which coded to construct mitochondrion-sized radiotransmitters and receivers. These tiny organic machines recorded the movements of their hosts by holding their positions relative to C. xavieri noverae, housed by other Enoshons within their transmitting range. The recording capacity of these microscopic devices was small. They had the capacity to store less than an hour's worth of movement, but each cellular division created a new recording machine, tracking movement anew. Military research introduced the genetically modified bug into the Hierarch's palace by way of a hand lotion, provided to an unsuspecting Colonial Union diplomat who had regular physical contact with her Enoshon counterparts. These Enoshons then transmitted the germ to other members of the palace staff simply through everyday contact. The diplomat's personal brain prostheses, and those of her entire staff, were also surreptitiously modified to record the tiny transmissions that would soon emanate from the palace staff and all its inhabitants, including the Hierarch and her heir. In less than a month, military research had a complete map of the internal structure of the Hierarch's palace, based on the movement of its staff. Military research never told the Colonial Union diplomatic staff of its unintentional espionage. Not only was it sacred for the diplomats, they would have been appalled at how they had been used. Jared reached the roof of the palace and dissolved his glider, landing away from the hole in case it collapsed. Other members of the second were landing or had landed and were preparing for their descent by securing repelling lines. Jared spotted Sarah Holland, who had walked up to the hole and was now peering down through the smoke and debris cloud. "Look down," Jared said to her. "Too late for that," she replied, and sent him a vertiginous image from her point of view.
Through their integration, Jared could sense her anxiety and anticipation. He felt that way himself. The repelling lines were secure. "Holly, you're back," said James Sagan. "Time to move." It had been less than 5 minutes since the beams had torn down from the sky. Each additional second brought the increased chance that their quarry had been moved. They were also working against the eventual arrival of troops and emergency responders. Blowing up the executive wing would distract and delay attention to the second platoon, but not for long. The three flipped in and dropped down 4 levels, straight into the Hierarch's residential apartments. The nursery was directly beyond. They had decided not to send the beam down directly on top of the nursery to avoid an accidental collapse. As Jared dropped, he sensed the wisdom of that decision. Surgical or not, the beam had made a mess of the 3 floors above the Hierarch's apartments,
And much of the damage had fallen straight down.
"Activate your infrared," Sagan said, as they repelled. "The lights are down and there's a lot of dust down there." Jared and Holland did as they were told. A glow suffused the air, heated by the exertions of the beam and the smoldering remains below. Residential guards assigned to the Hierarch's apartments flowed into the chamber as the 3 repelled down, battering through doors to get the invaders. Jared, Sagan, and Holland unclipped and dropped heavily into the debris pile below them, hastened by the Enoshon's heavier gravity.
Jared could feel the debris attempting to impale him as he struck it.
His unitard stiffened to avoid that. The three swept the room visually and with infrared to locate the guards and sent the information upward. A few seconds later, there were several sharp cracks from the roof. The residential guards dropped. "You're clear," said Alex Rector.
The wing is sealed off and we're not seeing any more guards. More of us are coming down.
As he said this, Julie Einstein and two other members of the Second began their descent on the lines. The nursery adjoined the hierarch's private chamber, and for security purposes, the rooms were a single sealable unit, impenetrable to the most violent attempts at entry, save massively powerful
particle beams shot down from space. Because the two rooms were assumed to be externally secure, the internal security between the rooms was light. A gorgeously carved but single-bolted door was the nursery's only security from the hierarch's chamber. Jared shot the lock and entered the room as Pauline and Sagan covered him. Something hurtled toward Jared as he checked his corners. He ducked and rolled,
And looked up to find an Energon attempting to bring an improvised club crashing down on his head. Jared blocked the hit with his arm and kicked upward, connecting with the Energon between its forward lower limbs. The Energon roared as the kick cracked its carapace. In his peripheral vision, Jared registered a second Energon in the room,
huddled in the corner and holding something that was screaming. The first Energon lunged again,
bellowing,
and then stopped bellowing, but kept lunging, collapsing in a pile on top of Jared.
After the Energon lay on top of him,
Jared realized that somewhere in there he had heard a burst of gunfire.
He looked around the body of the Energon and saw Sarah Pauling behind it, reaching over to grab the Energon's mantle to pull the corpse off Jared. "You could have tried killing it when it wasn't moving toward me," Jared said. "Plan again and I'll leave you underneath the damn thing," Pauling said. "Also, if you wouldn't mind pushing, we'll get it off you quicker." Pauling pulled and Jared pushed, and the Energon rolled to the side. Jared rolled out and got a good look at his attacker. "Is it him?" Pauling asked. "Can't tell," Jared said. "Kind of all look alike." "Move," Pauling said. He came in close to get a look at the Energon. She accessed her emission reading. "It's him," she said. "It's the father. It's the hierarch's consort."
Jared nodded. Jean Hill, the hierarch's consort, chosen for political reasons to
sire the heir. The matriarchal traditions of the Energon royalty dictated that the father of the heir was directly responsible for the heir's pre-metamorphic care. Tradition also dictated the father would stay awake at the side of the heir after the consecration ceremony for 3 Energon days to symbolize the acceptance of his paternal duties. This, among other reasons related to the consecration ceremony, was why the kidnapping was planned when it was. Jean Hill's assassination was a secondary but critical part of the mission. "He died for protecting his child," Jared said. "It's how he died," Pauling said. "It's not why he died." "I don't think the distinction matters much to him," Jared said. "This mission stinks," Pauling agreed. A burst of gunfire erupted from the corner of the room. The screaming that had been constant in the room since their entrance stopped briefly and then started up again even more urgently. Sagan came out of the corner, empty in one hand, a wriggling white mass secured in the other against the crook of her arm. The second Energon slumped where Sagan shot it. "The nanny," Sagan said. "She wouldn't give me the air." "You asked?" Pauling said. "I did," Sagan said, pointing to the small translation speaker she had clipped onto her belt. "It would have use later in the mission." "I tried anyway." "Our killing the consort probably didn't help," Jared said. The screaming thing in Sagan's arm twisted mightily and nearly got out of her grip. Sagan dropped her MP to get a better grip on it. It screamed ever louder as she squeezed it securely between her arm and body. Jared peered intently to look at it. "So that's the air," Jared said. "This is it," Sagan said. "She, actually, metamorphic Energon. It's
Screaming maggot. Can we sedate her? Pauling asked.
She's pretty loud." "No,"
Sagan said. "We need the hierarch to see that she's still alive." The air wriggled again.
Sagan began to stroke it with her free hand in an attempt to soothe it. like my MP formed to rack, she said. Jared bent down to retrieve the rifle. The lights went on.
Oh, shit,
Sagan
Sagan
said.
said.
Power's back.
I thought we blasted the backup generator.
Jared said. We did, Sagan said. Looks like there was more than one. Time to go. The three backed out of the nursery. Sagan with the air, Jared with his MP, and Sagan up in the road. In the main apartment, two members of the platoon were shimmying up the roofs. Julie Einstein had positioned herself to cover two doors into the apartment. They're going to cover the two levels above us, Einstein said. The hole goes through rooms on those levels with only one entrance to them. At least that's what the floor plan says. Top level is wide open now. Transport on its way, Alex Renton said. We've been spotted up here and we're starting to take fire.
We need people to cover us coming up, Sagan said, and to lay down suppressing fire on the first level. It's open. That's where they're going to come through.
On it, Renton said. Sagan handed the air to Holly, unslung her equipment pack, and pulled out a shoulder sling with a pouch sized to accommodate the air. She stuffed the squalling hair into the pouch with some difficulty, secured it, and placed the sling across her body with the strap over her right shoulder. On central line, Sagan said. Direct your left, Holly right. Einstein will cover us as we climb. And then you two cover her and the other two from the top as they get out. Clear? Clear, Jared and Pauline said. Reload my MP and give it to Einstein, Sagan said to Jared. She won't have time to reload. Jared cleared the magazine from Sagan's MP, reloaded it with one of the spares, and handed it to Einstein. She took it and nodded. We're ready for you, Renton said from above. You better hurry. As they went to their lines, they heard the sound of heavy Energon footfalls. Einstein began firing as they started to climb. At each of the next two levels, Jared's platoon mates were probably waiting, sighted in on their sole entrances. Jared's integration told them they were both scared shitless and waiting for the shoe to drop. From above Jared, new firing began. The Energons
Had come through on the top level. Sagan was weighed down by the air, but lacking her MP or her equipment pack.
on balance, she was traveling light, and blew up her line ahead of Jared and Polly. The pair of bullets that stitched across her shoulder hit her as she was within reach of the top and grasping for the hand of Julian Lowell to pull her up. A third bullet slipped past Sagan's shoulder and struck Lowell directly above his right eye, passing through his brain before ricocheting off the inside of his skull and burying itself in his neck, severing his carotid in the process. Lowell's head snapped back and then forward, his body slumping and falling forward into the hole.
He collided with Sagan as he fell, tearing the final scrap of fabric that kept intact
The sling holding the air.
Sagan felt the tear and the sling falling away, but was too occupied trying to keep herself from falling to do anything about it.
Catch it, she said, and was grabbed by Alex Renton and pulled to safety. Jared grabbed and missed, too far away. The sling rippled past Pauline, who snatched it as it fell and then swung as it described an arc around her. From below, Jared sensed a surprised shock of pain from Julie Einstein. Her MP went silent. The rustling sound that followed was the sound of Energons climbing into the hierarch's chambers. Polly looked up at Jared. Climb, she said. Jared climbed without looking down. As he passed the upper level of the palace, he glimpsed the bodies of a score of dead Energons, and more alive Energons behind him, firing at Jared as he climbed, while Jared's platoon mates fired back with bullets and grenades. Then he was beyond them, pulled up by an unseen platoon mate onto the roof of the palace. He turned back to see Sarah Pauling on her line, sling in hand, Energons below her aiming upward at her. Holding the sling, she could not climb. Pauling looked at Jared and smiled. Love it, she said, and flung the sling to him as the first of the bullets struck her body. Jared reached as she danced on her line, moved by the force of the projectiles that overwhelmed the defenses of her unitard and tore into her legs, torso, back, and skull. He caught the sling as she fell and pulled it from the hole as she found its bottom. He felt the last second of her life, and then it was gone. He was screaming as they pulled him into the transport. The Energon culture is both matriarchal and tribal. as befits a race whose far distant ancestors were hive-dwelling insect-like creatures. The hierarch comes to power through the vote of the matriarchs of the major Enoshon tribes. This makes the process sound rather more civilized than it is, since the vote-gathering process involved years of unspeakably violent civil war, as the tribes battled to make their own matriarch ascendant. To avoid massive unrest at the end of every hierarch's reign, once a hierarch is chosen, the position becomes hereditary and aggressively settled. A hierarch must produce and consecrate a viable heir within 2 Enoshon years of assuming the mantle,
thus assuring an orderly transfer of power for the future,
or have the hierarchical rule over the tribe end with her reign. Enoshon matriarchs, fed hormonally dense royal jellies that produce sweeping changes in their bodies, another artifact of their ancestry, are fertile lifelong.
the ability to produce an heir was rarely an issue. What would become an issue was
From which tribe to choose the father? Matriarchs do not marry for love. Strictly speaking, Enoshons don't marry at all. So political considerations would now come into play. The tribes unable to achieve hierarchy now competed on a much subtler, usually less violent level to produce a consort, with reward being social advantages for the tribe directly, and the ability to influence hierarchical policies as part of the dowry provided the consortium tribe. Hierarchs from newly ascended tribes traditionally took their consort either from their tribe's greatest ally, and say reward for service, or from the tribe of their greatest enemy, if the hierarchical vote had been particularly messy, and there was a perception that the entire Enoshon nation needed to be cobbled back together. Hierarchs from established lines,
on the other hand, had far greater leeway in choosing their consorts. Phileb Ser was the 6th hierarch
in the current Ser line. The tribe held the hierarchy 3 times previous over the last several hundred Enoshon years. Upon ascending, she chose her consort from the Kilo tribe, a tribe whose expansionist colonial ambitions
eventually led to the decision to ally in secret with the Array and the Oban in order to attack human space.
For its primary role in the war, Enoshon would come away with some of the colonial union's prime real estate,
including the colonial union home planet of Phoenix.
The Array would come away with somewhat fewer planets, but would get Coral, the planet that was the site of their recent humiliation by the colonial union. The Oban, cryptic to the latter, offered the previous forces only slightly less expansive than the Enoshon, but asked only for a single planet, the overpopulated and resource-stripped Earth, which was in such apparent repair that the colonial union had it under quarantine. Both the Enoshons and the Array were happy to see the planet. Hierarchical policy prompted by the Kilo inclined the Enoshon to plan a war with the humans. But although united by hierarchical rules, each Enoshon tribe kept its own council. At least one tribe, the Gelm, strongly opposed attacking the colonial union, since humans were usually strong, expressive nations that not especially principled when they felt threatened. The Gelm felt that the Array would have been a far better target, given that race's long-standing enmity with the Enoshons and its weak military state after being crushed by the humans at Coral. Hierarch Phileb Ser chose to ignore the Gelm's counsel in this matter, but noting the tribe's apparent fondness for humanity, selected one of the Gelm's tribal counselors, Hugh Gelm, as Enoshon's ambassador to the colonial union. Hugh Gelm recently recalled to Enoshon to witness the consecration of the heir and to celebrate the Chephalon with the hierarch. Hugh Gelm, who was with the hierarch when the second platoon attacked, and who was with her now, in hiding, as she was hailed by the humans who had murdered her consort and stolen her head. "They've stopped firing at us," Alex Brenton said. "Looks like they've figured out we have the air." "Good," Sagan said. Pauling and Einstein were dead. She had other soldiers stuck in the palace, and she wanted to get them out. She signaled them to make their way to the transport. She winced as Daniel Harvey tended to her shoulder. Her unitard blocked the first hit completely, but the second managed to get through and did some real damage. For now, her right arm was entirely useless. She motioned with her left hand to the small gurney in the middle of the transport. where the wriggling form of Vieux Serre, heir to the hierarch, lay securely strapped in.
The air no longer screamed, but mewed, her fear tempered by exhaustion.
Someone needs to give her the shot, Sagan said. I'll do it, Jarrett said, stood before anyone else could volunteer, and retrieved the long needle stored in the medical kit below Sagan's transport suit. He turned and stood over Vieux Serre. An overlay popped into his vision, via his brain,
Showing him where to insert the needle and how far to push into the heir's guts
to deliver what was inside the syringe. Jarrett jabbed the needle savagely into Vieux Serre, who screamed horribly at the invasion of the cold metal. Jarrett pressed the button on the syringe that shot half the contents into one of the heir's two immature reproductive sacs. Jarrett extracted the needle and plunged it into Vieux Serre's second reproductive sac, emptying the syringe. Inside the sacs, nanobots coated the interior walls and then burned, searing the tissues dead, rendering their owner irreversibly sterile. Vieux Serre wailed in confusion and pain. I've got the hierarch on the line, Renton said. Audio and video. Pipe her into the general feed, Sagan said. And Alex, stand by the gurney. You get to be the camera. Renton nodded and stood in front of the gurney, fixing on Sagan and allowing the audio and visual feeds to his brain valve from his ears and eyes to serve as microphone and camera.
Piping in now, Redkin said. In Jared's field of vision,
And in the field of vision of everyone in the transport, a hierarch of Anisha appeared. Even without knowing the map of Anishan expressions, it was clear the hierarch was incandescent with rage. You fucking piece of human shit, the hierarch said, or the translation said, eschewing a literal translation for something that expressed the intent behind the words. You have 30 seconds to give me my father, or I will declare war on every last one of your worlds. I swear to you I will reduce them to rubble. Shut up, Sagan said. The translation coming from her belt speaker.
From the other end of the line came multiple loud claps, indicating absolute shock from the hierarch's court. It was simply inconceivable someone would speak to her that way. I beg your pardon, the hierarch said, eventually, shocked herself. I said, shut up, Sagan said. If you are smart, you will listen to what I have to say to you and spare both our peoples needless suffering. Hierarch, you won't declare war on the colonial union here because you've already declared war on us. You, the RA, and the Oban. I don't have the slightest, the hierarch began. Fight me again and I'll cut off your daughter's head, Sagan said. More claps. The hierarch shut up. Now, Sagan said. Are you at war with the colonial union? Yes, the hierarch said, after a long moment. Or will be, presently. I think not, Sagan said. Who are you? The hierarch said. Where is Ambassador Hartley? Why am I negotiating with someone who is threatening to kill my child? I imagine Ambassador Hartling is in her office right now, trying to figure out what's going on, Sagan said. As you did not feel the need to enlighten her concerning your military plan,